After faking her death after divorce, Mr. Fu went crazy with the pregnancy test report. 6 years ago, she thought she was the happiest person in the world. 6 years later, she felt she was the unluckiest person. Chapter 1. Come back and sleep with me. Miss Sheng, I think people still need to be responsible for themselves, especially for their health. The doctor sighed, shook his head, and put the checklist in front of Xing Yinxi. The list clearly showed that she was not pregnant. But I got up this morning to test, and there were indeed 2 bars on the pregnancy test stick. Xing Yinxi was a little unwilling to give up and continued to ask. The doctor looked sympathetic. The pregnancy test stick will be inaccurate due to many factors. Besides, Miss Sheng, your body can no longer continue to toss like this. Even if you are pregnant, you may not be able to. The doctor's voice was a little hesitant. Xing Yinxi bit her lip, and the hope in her eyes was worn away bit by bit. Looking at the girl's pale face, the doctor was a little worried, but still followed the medical ethics and continued to remind her. As a doctor, I still hope you go for chemotherapy in time. Domestic medical facilities are becoming more and more complete. According to your condition, if you are treated properly, there will be no problem in 3 to 5 years. But I don't have time. Xing Yinxi muttered to herself, but in a moment, her eyes still stayed on the doctor's face. Doctor, I still want to try again. She has already taken 3 ovulation injections, and she doesn't mind taking 1 more. The doctor frowned, not understanding why the girl in front of him was so stubborn, and advised kindly, you have to think clearly, this is a hormone drug, there will be many side effects. It's okay, I know the severity. The doctor seemed to want to say something else, but seeing Xing Yinxi's persistence, he finally sighed, signed the form, and then handed it to her, and said, take it to the 2nd floor, no need to say more about the precautions. I remembered it before. Xing Yinxi took the test form with both hands and turned away. Before opening the door, she suddenly turned her head and looked at the doctor sitting there, with a smile on her lips. Thank you. She was very grateful to meet this doctor. At least this was the only person who showed kindness to her in her last moments in the world. The needle hurts. Once the ovulation needle is inserted, if you want to get pregnant, you must complete it within 24 hours. After returning home, Xing Yinxi has been thinking about what reason to use to trick Fu Yuhan back this time. The first time, she set up a trap to coerce and seduce. The second time, she used wine to drug him. Fu Yuhan must have hated her a long time ago. Xing Yinxi didn't have time to feel sad here. She quickly dialed the number she remembered by heart, and then, it was a long wait. Fu Yuhan would not answer her call. But Xing Yinxi had made up her mind. She ordered a virtual number online and kept calling Fu Yuhan with various phone numbers. Finally, an hour later, Fu Yuhan's irritable voice was heard. Xing Yinxi, are you fucking sick? Hearing this, she laughed at herself. Yes, she is sick, and it is deep in her bones. Fu Yuhan has lost his patience and asked coldly, what do you want to do? Fu Yuhan. She recited his name solemnly. Didn't you say you want a divorce? I agree. Fu Yuhan was stunned. In his memory, Xing Yinxi seemed to have never spoken to him so calmly, either roaring with unstable emotions or pestering him endlessly. Are you serious? He replied. Well, Xing Yinxi said, and then continued, but I have a condition, you come back tonight to accompany me, to sleep. She bit her lip and finally said the shameful words. As expected, the other party sneered when hearing this. Is this another new trick you came up with? Xing Yinxi, are you done yet? I have sent the divorce agreement to lawyer Zhao. If you don't come tonight, don't even think about asking me to sign it. Then you can't marry Zhu Yangyang in this life. She can only be a mistress in this life. Think about it carefully. After Xing Yinxi finished speaking, she hung up the phone directly. She knew that Fu Yuhan would definitely come. As long as it was about Zhu Yangyang, he would definitely keep it in his heart. The bright moon was in the sky, and the stars were twinkling. Xing Yinxi was not in the mood to appreciate the beautiful scenery in the sky. She went into the bathroom. The moment the hot water poured on her body, she felt a moment of tranquility. She suddenly figured out a lot of things. Instead of occupying the empty title of Mrs. Fu, it would be better to let go of the so-called obsession and spend the last stage of her life well. But before that, she had her responsibility. She had to save their child, the one Fu Yuhan didn't know, who was in the intensive care unit with all kinds of tubes inserted all over his body, and who called her mother softly when he saw her. The doctor said that only the umbilical cord blood between flesh and blood could save her. But she was running out of time. When the door lock opened, she hadn't finished taking a shower. Xingyanshi hurriedly pulled the bath towel to wipe off the water droplets on her body. As soon as she walked out of the bathroom door, she was pulled hard by a strong force. The next second, she was thrown heavily onto the bed. It was Fu Yuhan. She could clearly sense the coldness on Fu Yuhan's body, and the strong smell of alcohol after removing the clear smell on his body. Have you drunk? If I don't drink more, how can I bear the nausea to come and touch you? In one sentence, her dignity as a woman disappeared completely. Xingyanshi was not angry. Fu Yuhan was very strong. When he pulled off the bath towel, her skin was exposed to the air. The wet water droplets were vaguely hanging on her body. The coolness emanated from the soles of her feet. She couldn't help shivering. She couldn't help begging, "Yuhan, let me go, please. I'm cold." Fu Yuhan shook her hand away with disgust. Xingyanshi took advantage of the gap to wrap the bath towel around herself and restore some body temperature. As she turned her eyes, her voice was gentle and calm. "Why did you come back so soon? If you want a divorce, of course you have to hurry." He sat in the shadow, and the light only illuminated half of his body, flickering. Xingyanshi swallowed a mouthful of bitter water, gently hooked her fingers around his neck, and exhaled in his ear, "Then let's hurry up and start." Fu Yuhan's eyes darkened, and he held her waist with one hand and fell backwards. The moment she was penetrated, Xingyanshi felt a moment of pain, but before she could think about it, the man's body pressed straight up. "Yuhan, can you be gentler?" She was powerless to beg, but the man on her body did not listen to her pleas at all, and tried his best to vent his desires. Xingyanshi was like a broken doll, letting herself be slaughtered, biting her lips tightly, barely suppressing the discomfort in her body. Half an hour later, the love affair was about to end, and Xingyanshi didn't even have the strength to lift a finger. A thick smoke suddenly rushed into her nasal cavity, choking her and making her cough. With tears in her eyes, she forced herself to sit up from the edge of the bed with her painful body. Fu Yuhan had already dressed up, and then threw her the divorce agreement. "It's time to sign it." He frowned, his tone was extremely unhappy. Xingyanshi took the paper, raised the corner of her lips, but put it aside. "Can't you wait? What else do you want?" Fu Yuhan was completely furious, took a step forward, and pinched her slender neck with his slender fingers, exerting a little force. Xingyanshi's desire to cough was cut off, and her face turned red. She pulled his fingers one by one, took a few breaths, and then spoke. "I said to accompany me tonight, Fu Yuhan, this night. There are still 6 hours before dawn." She spoke, her voice full of doubt. Chapter 2 Buy 2 strings of fireworks and set them off in turns. Fu Yuhan sneered, "Why bother?" Xingyanshi lowered her eyes. "Yes, why bother?" Xingyanshi couldn't remember when she fell in love with Fu Yuhan. She tried to recall, but found that her memories of just over 20 years were almost all about Fu Yuhan. They were neighbors, grew up together, and were inseparable. Everyone said that they were a perfect match made in heaven. She had been in poor health since she was a child, and Fu Yuhan had always taken care of her. She was afraid of the dark, so Fu Yuhan would carry the little star light with him and tell her that as long as the light was on, he would always be by her side. Then when did the relationship start to deteriorate? Fu Yuhan smoked one cigarette after another, and Xingyanshi was choked by the smoke and could no longer hold her throat. She walked quickly into the bathroom and coughed out the fishy and salty smell. The red blood kept irritating her eye nerves. She turned on the faucet and watched the color gradually fade. Suddenly, she felt that fate was too ironic. God may think that she lived too happily, so he began to take away everything around her one by one. It seemed that when she was 20 years old, she put on her wedding dress with great expectations and married Fu Yuhan, but Fu Yuhan learned the sad news of his parents' death at the wedding. And the murderer turned out to be her family. Her biological mother. Later, her mother and uncle took over all the companies under the Fu family in the name of marriage, and used extraordinary means to forcefully merge the two companies into one. Since then, her uncle has become the real owner of the Fu family's industry. This result shocked everyone, but it was so real. Xingyanshi couldn't believe that her parents had planned the Fu family's industry early on, and her marriage to Fu Yuhan was just a name, a tool. But Fu Yuhan didn't believe that she had nothing to do with this matter. That day, Fu Yuhan lost his parents, his company, and all his feelings. In front of her, he smashed the star lamp he carried with him to pieces. His eyes were red, and he pointed at her nose and roared, "Get out, Xing Yinxi, get out." No matter how Xing Yinxi explained, it was useless. She had no choice but to knock on the door frantically to ask her uncle why, but her uncle sneered and threw her abroad directly. Xing Yinxi didn't know she was pregnant until she arrived abroad. In order to prevent her from returning to China secretly, her uncle even sent many spies to monitor her every move. Perhaps because of the worry during pregnancy and loss of appetite, the child had severe leukemia since birth and had been relying on huge medical expenses to barely maintain his life. She had always wanted to return to China to discuss with Fu Yuhan, but she waited for 6 years before she escaped back when the person in charge was lax. But when she returned to China, Xing Yinxi despairedly found that he was holding another girl in his arms. The girl's name was Zhu Yangyang. I heard from a friend that the girl was a ray of light in his life, accompanying him through the most difficult time. I heard from a friend that he regarded Zhu Yangyang as his treasure, and rebuilt his business empire for her. In just 3 years, the business territory expanded suddenly, and it could now compete with the current Xing family. I heard that the two were very loving, but they just couldn't get married. And Xing Yinxi also knew the reason why they couldn't get married. 6 years ago, before the two had their wedding, they had already obtained a marriage certificate. At least in the legal sense, Xing Yinxi was Mrs. Fu in an upright manner. In these 6 years, Fu Yuhan forced and threatened her countless times to sign the divorce agreement quickly, but Xing Yinxi gritted her teeth and refused. She always felt that Fu Yuhan still loved her. He would believe that she had nothing to do with that matter. He would find out the truth and clear her name. But she didn't wait for this day, but waited for the critical illness notice of advanced gastric cancer. A sour feeling suddenly came up in her stomach, and Xing Yinxi couldn't help vomiting. The fishy and salty smell with a rusty taste came out from the corner of her mouth and dripped into the white basin in the bathroom. Their voice attracted Fu Yuhan. "What are you doing again?" He spoke with an unhappy voice, but when he saw the remaining blood in the basin, his pupils shrank, but in a flash, he was still indifferent. Xing Yinxi keenly caught the emotions in his eyes. He still cares about himself. Xing Yinxi couldn't help thinking. Tears gradually blurred her vision. She lowered her eyes and said, "Yuhan, if I tell you that I have a serious illness, will you?" Before she finished speaking, Fu Yuhan sneered and interrupted her, "Stop, don't play the sympathy card. If you die, I will buy 2 strings of fireworks and set them off in turn. What's more, I don't even need to divorce. I will take your death certificate and go to Yangyang to get the certificate." Xing Yinxi was suddenly speechless. The water gradually wiped away the scarlet in the basin. Under the moonlight, her shadow stretched very long on the ground. She was thin to begin with, and she had been tortured by illness for a long time. When she was quiet, she could clearly hear her heartbeat. "Where did you go today?" Fu Yuhan took a cigarette, washed away the burning cigarette but with water, and then turned off the faucet. Xing Yinxi raised her eyes, and a trace of hope rose in her heart. "Are you concerned about me?" "You think too much. I asked Lawyer Zhao to come over today to discuss a natural divorce after separation, but he said you were not at home." Xing Yinxi's hope was completely destroyed, and she answered truthfully, "I went to the hospital." "Why go to the hospital? Didn't I tell you that I was sick?" Xing Yinxi curled her lips and smiled bitterly. "Xing Yinxi!" Fu Yuhan suddenly roared, was silent for a moment, and suddenly calmed down. "I feel like I have never seen through you." Xing Yinxi did not speak, and the air was quiet with only Fu Yuhan's voice. "We grew up together. I will do whatever you want. Even if you want all the assets of my Fu family, I will give it to you. Why do you have to plan all this and let my parents die before you are willing? They like you so much, and even treat you as their own daughter. I believe that after we get married, as long as you ask, they are willing to give it to you, but you have been acting with me for so many years." Xing Yinxi heard this, her voice was a little choked. "Yuhan, if I say that I really don't know anything, will you believe it?" "Heh," Fu Yuhan sneered in his throat. Xing Yinxi understood that he didn't believe it. During that time, Fu Yuhan's parents died, and the compensation for the unfulfilled contract almost crushed him, while the Xing family took the opportunity to buy all the assets under the Fu family's name, and she was also forcibly thrown abroad by her uncle. In this situation, no one would believe that Xing Yinxi didn't know everything. "Yuhan. Xing Yinxi, please stop torturing me. Chapter 3 Mom will definitely save you." Fu Yuhan continued, "If Yang Yang hadn't appeared by my side to encourage and persuade me, I might have really died. I love her, so just think of it as a good deed and help me. Xing Yanxi listened to his words, her heart filled with endless bitterness. It felt like her heart was being kneaded repeatedly by a pair of big hands, and she felt so dull and painful that she suffocated. He didn't believe her, nor did he love her. And the girl he loved was Zhu Yangyang. Tried to suppress the pain in her heart, Xing Yanxi spoke, and clearly heard the hoarseness in her voice. Can you tell me what kind of person Zhu Yangyang is? Even though it hurt her heart, she wanted to listen. When Fu Yuhan mentioned Zhu Yangyang, his expression was obviously softer, and he said proudly, she is very beautiful and gentle. She will encourage me when I need help the most, and she will always pay attention to my emotions. She is very smart and will help me think about some business problems. Every word he said was like a sharp blade, deeply stabbing into Xing Yanxi's heart. One after another, until her heart was bleeding and broken. Xing Yanxi lowered her eyes and made a sound for a long time. Does she love you? Of course. Xing Yanxi nodded. That's good, as long as Fu Yuhan is happy. At least when she leaves, Fu Yuhan will still have someone who loves him. At least, she will not die with guilt. The sky in midsummer always gets bright early, and the sunrise shines obliquely on the curtains, reflecting between the two of them. Xing Yanxi looked at the sun rising slowly in the sky and tried to smile. Fu Yuhan, you should go. Fu Yuhan didn't move, frowning and staring at her. She naturally knew what Fu Yuhan wanted. She raised her eyes and looked into Fu Yuhan's eyes. Don't worry, I will definitely do what I promised you. Tonight, the divorce agreement will be in your hands. Fu Yuhan always felt that Xing Yanxi seemed a little different today. Just as he was thinking, there was suddenly a little warmth in his arms. Don't move, let me hold you for a while, just as my last wish. Her voice was a little choked when she said this. Fu Yuhan was full of impatience, and she didn't think about what she meant by the last wish. Xing Yanxi didn't know when she fell asleep. She only knew that when she woke up, the pain in her body kept reminding herself of what happened yesterday. She subconsciously touched aside, but found that the beds around her had long lost their temperature. She got up with difficulty and cleaned up the mess with pain. Maybe Fu Yuhan wanted to leave this disgusting place quickly. When Xing Yanxi was packing, she found his watch left here. Xing Yanxi carefully picked up the watch and put it in a box. Inside the box, there was a photo of her daughter. Xinshin, Mom will definitely find a way to save you. She stroked her daughter in the photo with her fingers, and her eyes were blurred by tears in the next second. Walking out of the bedroom, there was a striking white paper on the table. Xing Yanxi didn't need to guess, she knew what it was. She smiled bitterly, picked up the paper, and found that the divorce agreement was exactly the same as the document she sent to Lawyer Zhao. However, she found that there was an addition in the bottom line. It was written in black and white that after the divorce, she must promise that she would never return to City A in this life, otherwise he had the right to take back all the assets he gave her. Xing Yanxi felt bitter in her heart. She really didn't want any assets or no assets, but this one clearly showed Fu Yuhan's determination not to see her again in this life. After thinking for a while, Xing Yanxi picked up the pen and signed it directly. Seeing her name appear on the divorce agreement, Xing Yanxi couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. She signed it, but the agreement couldn't be handed over to him yet. She still needed to stay here before the formal divorce. After thinking about it, she signed and walked to the courier point, and agreed with the courier that the document would be sent out in 7 days. After the ovulation injection, she needed to go for a follow-up examination. Xing Yanxi didn't dare to waste time, and went to the hospital after packing up. It was the same doctor as yesterday. The doctor frowned immediately after seeing the bruises on her neck and asked worriedly, Ms. Xing, have you received any personal threats? Xing Yanxi subconsciously touched her neck, pulled up her collar, and shook her head. Doctor, you don't have to worry. I want to know when I can know if I am pregnant. It will take at least a week. The doctor said, and further advised, Ms. Xing, if you are not pregnant after a week, you must come to the hospital for chemotherapy. Your condition cannot be delayed any longer. I know. Xing Yanxi had already made the worst plan before this. If I don't have chemotherapy, how long do I have left? The doctor sighed, only half a year. After the doctor finished speaking, he continued to add, for a condition like yours, it will be very painful in the later stage. Many patients give up their lives without chemotherapy or treatment. If you are determined not to come for treatment, then I hope you are ready to fight the disease. Xing Yanxi nodded and smiled. Doctor, I have confidence in myself. Seeing this, The doctor did not dissuade him at all, and showed a touch of sympathy on his face. Although I don't know what happened to you, you are the bravest patient I have ever seen. Walking out of the hospital full of disinfectant, Xing Yinshi took a deep breath of fresh air outside. The midsummer sun was dazzling. It seemed that it was about to rain, and the air was particularly hot, but Xing Yinshi felt piercingly cold. A sudden phone ring sounded in the space. As soon as Xing Yinshi answered the phone, Fu Yuhan's questioning voice echoed in his ears. Have you signed? Xing Yinshi did not speak. The long silence drove Fu Yuhan on the other end of the phone crazy. His voice was full of impatience. Xing Yinshi, you'd better sign it honestly for me, don't play tricks. I've already signed it. Xing Yinshi spoke with a little hoarseness in her voice. Hearing that she had signed it, Fu Yuhan's tone softened a little. Then give it to me, I'll let lawyer Zhao find you. Yuhan, the divorce agreement is not in my hands. Xing Yinshi could clearly feel Fu Yuhan's anger. Xing Yinshi, what on earth are you going to do? You told me yesterday that as long as I promised you, you would sign the divorce agreement. You can use such despicable means. How can you be so cheap? Are you so short of men? If you are short of men, I can spend money to find one for you. You don't have to use such disgusting means to disgust me. Chapter 4. You don't want your daughter's life. Listening to the shouting and cursing from the other side, Xing Yinshi suddenly felt very unfamiliar. The voice was so familiar, yet the words were so piercing. In the first 20 years, he never said a harsh word to her. He was always so gentle and caring, and always soothing her with a doting voice. Xing Yinshi listened to his yelling quietly, curled her lips, and said in a surprisingly calm voice, Yuhan, I'm afraid of the dark. Do you still have a star light on you? Fu Yuhan's patience had obviously reached its limit. He was breathing heavily and furious. I don't have time to listen to your nonsense. Just tell me, when can you give me the divorce agreement? If you feel even a little guilty towards my parents, then hurry up and get a divorce. Then go wherever you want and never see them again. I promise you, but you have to wait 7 days. Xing Yinshi's voice was filled with pleading. Yuhan, don't worry. I will never go back on my promise to you. But can you spare some time in the next few days to have dinner with me? Even if it's only for a short while. The answer she got was a cold hang-up tone. Xing Yinshi didn't feel any pain in her heart, perhaps because she had been in pain for so long that her heart had become numb. There was a sudden bump on my body. Xing Yinshi lowered her head and saw a little boy in ragged clothes with tear marks on his face. He seemed to realize that he had bumped into someone and quickly apologized in a low voice. I'm sorry, Auntie, I didn't mean it. Xing Yinshi felt pity for him, slowly squatted down, and asked, Little boy, where is your mother? The little boy cried a little, I'm sick, my mother went out to work, and she let me treat myself in the hospital. Then why don't you just stay in the hospital? The little boy burst into tears when he heard this. Wow, it's all my fault. If I wasn't sick, Mom wouldn't have to work so hard. Being sick costs a lot of money. I don't want to burden Mom anymore. Xing Yinshi's heart was immediately severely hurt. Yes, being sick costs a lot of money. She thought for a moment and put all the money in her bag into the little boy's hand. I'm giving you all this. I don't know if it can cure your disease. The cash was heavy, about 20,000 or 30,000 yuan. The little boy was stunned and looked at Xing Yinshi in disbelief. Auntie, are these all for me? Xing Yinshi nodded and muttered to herself, I won't be able to use it in the future anyway. The little boy's eyes were full of doubts. Auntie, are you sick too? Yes, and it will never be cured. Xing Yinshi smiled bitterly, took out a pure gold necklace and put it around the little boy's neck. The little boy immediately wanted to return the money and necklace to her. Mom said that we can't just take other people's things. I can't take these things. Xing Yinshi tilted her head, looked at the little boy, and smiled. Why don't you recite a poem to your auntie as a reward? When the little boy heard this, he nodded and began to recite a poem. The grass on the plain is withered and flourishing every year. After reciting the poem, the little boy touched the necklace on his neck without taking it off, but returned all the money in his hand to Xing Yinshi. Auntie, I just want one thing from you, and I will return the rest of the money to you. Also, I wish Auntie to have more money to treat her illness. After saying that, the little boy ran away. Xing Yinshi looked at the money in her hand, then looked at the little boy running away, and felt deeply moved for a moment. Money is a life-saving straw, but also a deadly poison. Her mother and uncle could plot to harm Fu's parents for money, but she could also use the money to save the little boy's life. When she returned to her residence, Xing Yinxi was about to open the door when she saw a graceful figure. She was wearing a white long dress, with black hair draped over her shoulders. Her voice was gentle and sweet. "Miss Sheng, right? I've been waiting for you for a long time." The woman spoke and extended her hand, her movements graceful and natural. Xing Yinxi knew who she was at a glance. After all, Fu Yuhan's phone screen had always been filled with her photo. "Zhu Yangyang. What do you want from me?" Xing Yinxi suppressed the turmoil in her heart and tried to keep her tone calm. Zhu Yangyang took out an invitation from her bag, which was printed with red gilded patterns. "My wedding with Yuhan will be held in 7 days. If you are free, I welcome you to attend the wedding." Looking at the red color handed over, Xing Yinxi felt it was extremely dazzling. She did not take it, but smiled and said, "Aren't you afraid that I will blow up your wedding scene?" "Of course I'm not afraid," Zhu Yangyang said confidently, and then a mysterious arc appeared at the corner of her mouth. "Unless you don't want your daughter's life." Xing Yinxi was startled and her pupils suddenly dilated. "How do you know I have a daughter?" A bad premonition spread in her heart. In this world, even her biological father Fu Yuhan didn't know of his daughter's existence, so how did Zhu Yangyang know? "Of course I know. I also know that she got leukemia because of an accidental infection during delivery. I'm not afraid to tell you a secret. The doctor who delivered her was my aunt." Zhu Yanyan's smile got wider, with a hint of provocation. "What a poor child. He has never seen the beauty of this world since he was born." Xing Yinxi clenched her hands tightly together, her whole body trembling with intense anger. "Why? Of course it's because of Yuhan." Zhu Yangyang spoke as a matter of course, her voice as if it was poisoned and made people shudder. "If you want your daughter to live, then hurry up and give the divorce agreement to Han. To be honest, the car accident 6 years ago was not an accident. I just had someone tamper with the brakes, and they died. They are so unlucky." Xing Yinxi was stunned and asked in disbelief, "That's a living being, why is it so? The old couple of the Fu family loves you so much and wants you to marry Yuhan. How can I be in this position now if I don't do something?" Zhu Yangyang curled her lips, suddenly moved closer to her, and narrowed her eyes. "Your condition is probably already in the advanced stage. I came here just to let you die with a clear mind." Bang! Xing Yinxi used up all her strength and slapped her. Before Zhu Yangyang could react, she was pushed hard against the wall, and she felt a strong sense of suffocation around her neck. Xing Yinxi's eyes were red, and there was endless cruelty in them. Zhu Yangyang didn't expect that she would take action directly, but when she saw the look in her eyes, she couldn't help but feel a little frightened. She could feel that Xing Yinxi really wanted to strangle her to death. Zhu Yanyan's face flushed red as she peeled off her fingers one by one. Just when she was extremely regretful for provoking such a female devil, the strength in her neck suddenly disappeared. Taking a deep breath of fresh air, Zhu Yangyang coughed for a long time before she found her voice again. "If you dare to touch me, Yuhan will not let you go. Do you think I, a dying man, would be afraid of this?" Chapter 5 Paving the way with her blood. Xing Yinxi sneered, raised her foot, and kicked Zhu Yangyang in the stomach cleanly. Zhu Yanyan's face turned pale with pain. She covered her abdomen with fear in her eyes. "Xing Yinxi, if I die, your daughter won't live long either. Then I will let you be buried with her." Xing Yinxi grabbed a wooden stick beside her and smashed it towards Zhu Yangyang. A muffled sound. The stick made a heavy sound when it hit flesh, but the person who was hit was not Zhu Yangyang. But it was Fu Yuhan. Fu Yuhan stared at her with a serious expression, as if he wanted to cut her into pieces. Then he looked at Zhu Yangyang gently and spoke with concern. "Yangyang, are you okay?" Zhu Yangyang was like a frightened rabbit at this moment. Her eyes immediately turned red when she saw Fu Yuhan. She quickly leaned close to him and said, "I'm fine." Xing Yinxi threw away the stick in her hand and got up from the ground. Her body was covered with mud and dark red blood flowed down her fingertips. "Fu Yuhan, you are really blind." He actually regarded such a vicious woman as a treasure. Fu Yuhan didn't understand. He stood up, ignoring the pain in his body, and hugged Zhu Yangyang in his arms, his eyes cold. "I am blind. How could I fall in love with a woman like you in the past 20 years? Looking at Zhu Yangyang who was panicking in Fu Yuhan's arms, she keenly caught the provocation in her eyes. Xing Yinxi suddenly understood that this was something Zhu Yangyang had prepared early in the morning. He deliberately came to give her the invitation, deliberately angered her, and deliberately came at the right time for Fu Yuhan to see it. Taking a deep breath, she suddenly felt that the woman in front of her was so terrifying. She had such scheming and calculations, but she and Fu Yuhan were played around like fools. Fu Yuhan's tone was clearly impatient. Xing Yinxi, go and divorce me right away. I don't want to wait even a minute longer. Upon hearing this, Xing Yinxi suddenly raised her eyes and laughed wildly. Fu Yuhan, I said it will only take 7 days, not even a day less. You are hopeless. Xing Yinxi curled his lips, his eyes cold, looking at Zhu Yangyang in his arms. Not only that, I also order you to come to be with me every night for the next 7 days, otherwise, I will kill Zhu Yangyang. Fu Yuhan was furious and grabbed her wrist fiercely. Are you threatening me? Even if that's the case, I can do anything now. Since I was able to plot to kill your parents a few years ago, then I have the ability to kill Zhu Yangyang. You can do whatever you want. Xing Yinxi, why are you so disgusting? Seeing his furious look, Xing Yinxi suddenly felt very happy. She narrowed her eyes and said, don't worry, after 7 days, I will definitely fulfill my promise and disappear from your sight. Fu Yuhan didn't say anything, just stared at her with frowned eyebrows. Xing Yinxi knew that he didn't want to do that at all. But she knew too well what Fu Yuhan was like when he loved someone, and he couldn't bear to let Zhu Yangyang get hurt. Everyone has weaknesses. Xing Yinxi's weakness is her daughter, and Fu Yuhan's weakness is Zhu Yangyang. Anyway, in Fu Yuhan's eyes, she was already an unforgivable sinner, so what did it matter if she was a little crazy? She narrowed her eyes, not giving Fu Yuhan a chance to think, opened the door and walked in. I'll wait for you at home at 7 o'clock in the evening. After saying that, he closed the door. This is a new house with a huge floor-to-ceiling window. Xing Yinxi looked out the window and the two people were no longer there. Fu Yuhan should have taken Zhu Yangyang to the hospital. Even though she was the one hitting him. Xing Yinxi understood Fu Yuhan. This was the kind of person he was. When he loved someone, he wanted to pick all the stars in the sky for her, but when he hated someone, he didn't even want to say a word. However, she suddenly didn't want to die unjustly like this. Why should she use her blood to pave the way for Zhu Yangyang? She made up her mind, took out her phone and started recording the video. In the camera, she looked thin, with the thin flesh on her cheeks already sunken, but she still showed a gentle smile to the camera. Shinshin, I am your mother. Although I don't know if I will still be in this world when you watch this video, don't be sad, Shinshin. Mommy just changed a way to continue to accompany you. I hope baby will be happy every day, just like your name, thriving and spend the rest of your life. Ever since she found out she had stomach cancer, she has been recording a video like this every day, and now it's several GB in size. She recorded the video, saved it in a USB drive, then found a courier and mailed it at an agreed time. Lying quietly on the bed, Xing Yinxi always felt that there were things she had not grasped. She carefully recalled what Zhu Yangyang had said, as well as the details of what happened 6 years ago. Suddenly she stood up and found the contact information of the servant who had worked in the Fu family before. When she called the number, her hands were shaking. She had been deceived before and had never taken the initiative to find out the truth. The other end of the line was quickly connected, with a familiar and friendly tone. Who are you? Mother Zhao, I'm Yun Shi. Hey, Miss Shen, why are you calling me? How have you been these past few years? Hearing the concerned voice on the phone, Xing Yinxi's eyes suddenly turned red. In all these years abroad, no one had ever truly cared about her. Jiaomar watched her and Fu Yuhan grow up. Fu's parents were kind to Jiaomar, so they took her in and let her work at home. Until the Fu family fell apart, Jiaomar still served Fu Yuhan. But for some reason, I didn't see Jiaomar when I came back this time. I heard from others that she fell ill 2 years ago and voluntarily resigned and returned to her hometown. Mother Zhao, where are you now? I have something to ask you. There was silence on the other end of the phone for 2 seconds, and she asked tentatively, Miss Sheng, are you still with the young master now? Xing Yinxi bit her lip, keenly hearing some clues in Jiaomar's words. It counts, it doesn't count. Jiaomar, do you know something? Mother Zhao didn't say anything. She hesitated for a long time, and finally said, Miss, let's talk about this in person. I'm going to buy a train ticket now and will arrive tomorrow morning. Is that okay with you? No problem, I'll pick you up. For a moment, Xing Yinxi seemed to feel her heart beating again. Fu Yuhan would not believe what she said, but if Jiaomar knew the truth and told him again, he would definitely believe it. As long as he is willing to investigate what happened back then, there will be hope that the truth will come out. She suddenly became excited, but felt aggrieved at the same time. She took out her cell phone, recorded the incident, and dragged the video to a USB drive. When the clock struck 7:15, there was a loud noise at the door. Chapter 6. Do you admit your mistake? Xing Yinxi trembled all over. You don't have to think about who it is. The sound came from far away, from the first floor hall to the second floor stairs, and then stopped at the door of his room. She only felt that the frequency of her body shaking was getting faster and faster, and she could hardly control her trembling heart. Bang! After a sound, the door was kicked open fiercely by Fu Yuhan. Xing Yinxi's eyelashes trembled as he listened to Fu Yuhan walk up behind him and speak in a cold voice. Why are you pretending? Aren't you doing all this just to get me to come back and stay with you? A feeling of bitterness filled my heart. She just felt as if her heart was blocked by someone. However, when he thought of what he had said to Fu Yuhan before, he felt relieved. In Fu Yuhan's heart, he has already become an unforgivable sinner, so why is he still struggling? Thinking of this, Xing Yinxi forced a smile and touched his chest with trembling fingers. You're back. Fu Yuhan didn't even look at her and threw her hand aside. Xing Yinxi lost her balance and fell to the ground. She coughed twice in embarrassment, but got up again and pretended nothing had happened. Seeing her like this, Fu Yuhan frowned and looked at her with disgust. Xing Yinxi, why didn't I realize before that you are so mean? Facing his ridicule, Xing Yinxi's lips trembled and she forced a smile. You weren't like this to me before, have you forgotten? It would have been better if she didn't say it, but once she said it, Fu Yuhan's anger was immediately ignited. He threw Xing Yinxi onto the bed, staring at her with his bloodshot eyes as if he wanted to eat her up. How dare you say that? If you hadn't destroyed our family, would I be like this now? Xing Yinxi closed her eyes gently, not looking at Fu Yuhan's angry expression, but just endured his anger. Seeing that she didn't respond, Fu Yuhan became even angrier and questioned her angrily. Xing Yinxi, do you admit your mistake or not? Why don't you believe me? If she didn't mean to piss me off, do you think I would do that? Xing Yinxi stared at him with tears in her eyes. Fu Yuhan was stunned by her look. She looked so pitiful, but he reacted quickly the next second and sneered. You are always like this, he pinched Xing Yinxi's jaw with his big hand, fixing her so that she could not move, and sneered, can you learn to admit your mistakes and stop making excuses all the time, huh? I'm not wrong. Fu Yuhan squeezed her too hard, and Xing Yinxi almost squeezed out these words from between her teeth. Tears filled her eyes, blurring her vision so that she could hardly see Fu Yuhan's face. Seeing that she was reluctant to admit her mistake, Fu Yuhan became even angrier. He reached out to break free from the restraints on her and said sarcastically, your persistence really impressed me. As soon as she finished speaking, she heard Fu Yuhan ripping off her clothes and treating her like an emotionless doll. I want to see how long you can keep your mouth shut. Although this was not the first time she was treated like this, Xing Yinxi's heart still ached and she couldn't help but shed tears. How did the two of them become what they are now? Just halfway through, Fu Yuhan's cell phone rang. Yuhan, I'm awake and feeling a little uncomfortable. Can you come and keep me company? Fu Yuhan pressed the speakerphone, and Zhu Yanyan's voice clearly floated into Xing Yinxi's ears. Xing Yinxi clenched her fingers slightly and unconsciously grasped the corner of Fu Yuhan's clothes. But he didn't hesitate at all after hearing it. After agreeing, he picked up Xing Yinxi and dragged her out the door. Go to the hospital and apologize to Yang Yang. Xing Yinxi's eyes were filled with panic. Fu Yuhan, my clothes are torn. Fu Yuhan looked at her jokingly and said, can't you wear it like this? Don't you like it this way? She gritted her teeth to protect her private parts, and when she passed the sofa downstairs, she quickly grabbed a coat and put it on herself, and screamed again. I'm not going. His eyes lightly swept over Xing Yinxi's body, and the sarcasm in his tone was undisguised. Xing Yinxi, if you don't want to appear naked in broad daylight, just disobey me. She shuddered, then clutched her coat tightly and followed him in silence. The car drove quickly to the hospital. After getting off the car, Xing Yinxi was almost dragged by Fu Yuhan to Zhu Yanyan's ward. Seeing the two of them, a fleeting glint of pride flashed across Zhu Yanyan's eyes, but turned into panic the next second. Yuhan, why is she here? As she spoke, Zhu Yanyan pretended to be scared and snuggled into Fu Yuhan's arms, looking extremely frightened. Fu Yuhan just hugged her lovingly and whispered coaxingly in her ear. It's okay. She won't dare to hurt you as long as I'm here. Xing Yinxi was thrown to the ground by Fu Yuhan. Because of her illness and Fu Yuhan's lack of mercy just now, Xing Yinxi was in so much pain that she couldn't get up immediately. Sister, please stand up and apologize, and this matter will be over. Zhu Yangyang looked at Xing Yinxi smugly and said in a pitiful manner. But in Fu Yuhan's eyes, this scene was just a show. He frowned. Xing Yinxi, can't you get up by yourself? Or are you born a lowly creature who just likes to kneel? Xing Yinxi gritted her teeth and finally stood up. Facing Fu Yuhan, Xing Yinxi clearly realized that it was impossible for her not to apologize. Moreover, I am still in the stage of preparing for pregnancy. If I continue to pester her, not only will I be disregarding my body, but it will also be detrimental to my pregnancy. It's better to end it sooner. She bit her lip, trying her best to keep her voice from trembling. I'm sorry, Miss Zhu. I was too impulsive at the time. I apologize to you here. After saying this, she bowed. But when she stood up, Xing Yinxi suddenly felt a black screen in front of her eyes and almost fell down. Fu Yuhan gave her a mocking look and ignored her. Go away. He just said this. Xing Yinxi's forehead was covered with sweat. She couldn't help but turn around and take a deep breath, trying to escape from this suffocating space. But after she walked out of the ward and took only 2 steps, her vision went dark and she fainted completely. Before her vision became completely dark, Xing Yinxi vaguely felt a man rushing towards her. She didn't know who it was, but it definitely couldn't be Fu Yuhan. When she woke up, she found herself in the ward. There was only one doctor in the ward besides her. Are you awake? The doctor looked at her with some concern. She struggled to sit up from the hospital bed, thinking back to what happened last night, trying her best to suppress the bitterness in her heart. Miss Shen, you are in very poor health right now. You need to get enough rest, otherwise you will be overdrawing your own life. Chapter 7, There is another hidden story. His face was serious, and Xing Yinxi could see that he was very weak. Thank you for saving me. Xing Yinxi had just come back to her senses from her sleep, but she had more important things to do. She just nodded hastily, but noticed the bright sky outside the window. What time is it now? Her heart tightened and she asked anxiously. It's 6:30 in the morning, what's wrong? Hearing the time, Xing Yinxi gritted her teeth, grabbed her phone and ran out of the ward. Damn, it's almost time. Zhao Ma's train arrives at 7 o'clock this morning, and I must not waste time. After she ran out of the hospital, she quickly took a taxi and met Zhao Ma just as she got off the car. After not seeing each other for a few years, Mother Zhao held Xing Yinxi's hand with heartache. How come you have lost so much weight? Xing Yinxi curled the corners of her mouth and didn't take it to heart. It's okay, Aunt Zhao. I'll find a hotel first and we'll go in and rest for a while. After saying that, Xing Yinxi took Zhao Ma's hand and left. But in a corner that neither of them saw, someone was silently watching all this and then reporting to a mysterious person. Mother Zhao has entered the capital city. The man was drinking tea, and he paused when he heard the words, with a hint of inquiry in his voice. Is the news true? It is absolutely true. I saw it with my own eyes. The man didn't say anything after hearing this, but silently put down the teacup. His facial features were immersed in the darkness, making it impossible to see his face and expression. The two arrived at the hotel, and Xing Yinxi brought a glass of water to Zhao Ma. Mother Zhao, drink some water and talk slowly. There's no rush. Although she said this, Aunt Zhao could see that Xing Yinxi was extremely curious about the truth of that year, so she quickly told her. I was just a maid at the time, so I didn't know the truth, but I could get a glimpse of it. Speaking of this, Zhao Ma's expression became a little solemn. I only know that what happened back then was related to the secretary beside Mr. Fu. Xing Yinxi quickly asked, what's the secretary's name? Lin Ji. After saying this, Zhao Ma confirmed it again in her mind and nodded, yes, that's right, that's the name. He is definitely involved in this matter. I saw something was wrong and wanted to test him, but Mr. Fu trusted him very much at the time, and I was almost discovered by the secretary. In order to protect myself, I had to leave on the pretext of being sick. After hearing what Aunt Zhao said, Xing Yinxi became extremely nervous. Mother Zhao, is what you said true? Her voice was trembling. If what she said was correct, it meant there was something else going on. Then when I tell Fu Yuhan, things might turn around. I can make Fu Yuhan believe in me again. The more Xing Yinxi thought about it, the more excited she became. After hearing Zhao Mar nod confidently, she pulled Zhao Mar's hand even more excitedly. Come on, Aunt Zhao, I'll take you to find Fu Yuhan. No matter what, Zhao Mar is still an elder of the Fu family. With Zhao Mar's confession, she doesn't believe that Fu Yuhan would not believe it at all. She quickly took a taxi and went to the company to find Fu Yuhan. All the way, her heart was pounding nervously. She felt that she had never been so close to the truth. The car was halfway through its journey and was passing an intersection when it was hit by a speeding car. "R!" Mother Zhao screamed in panic. Xing Yinxi was also shocked as she watched Zhao Mar being hit hard by the car. Countless glass fragments hit her face and scratched it. The car was hit so badly that it rolled several times in the middle of the road and fell to the ground like a pile of scrap metal. Xing Yinxi just felt dizzy and there was no place on her body that didn't hurt. She looked extremely dazed. Before she fainted, she used all her strength to look in the direction of Wang Mar and found that she was more seriously injured than herself. Her head was tilted to one side and she was not even breathing. Somehow, she suddenly felt that a huge conspiracy was hanging over her head. When she woke up again, she found herself in the hospital, with tubes inserted all over her body, and it seemed that she was seriously injured. Before she could react, a familiar figure entered his field of vision. "Doctor!" Xing Yinxi greeted her excitedly. Jiu Huai walked to her side somewhat helplessly, and only breathed a sigh of relief after seeing the instrument next to him showing that Xing Yinxi's vital signs were stable. "Luckily you are lucky enough to survive such a serious car accident." But she had no other thoughts about these things, and asked nervously. "Where's Aunt Zhao? How is Aunt Zhao? Mother Zhao?" Jiu Huai didn't know the Zhao Mar she mentioned, but based on the car accident, he could roughly tell who it was. Seeing the difficulty on his face, Xing Yinxi suddenly became anxious. "What happened to Aunt Zhao? Don't get excited yet." Jiu Huai quickly calmed her down and sighed helplessly. "She passed away, but don't be sad. You must stay calm and think of it as thinking about the baby in your belly." Before Xing Yinxi had time to digest the news of Zhao Mar's death, she heard that she was pregnant. "What? I'm pregnant?" She excitedly grabbed Jiu Huai's arm with terrifying strength. Jiu Huai felt a little pain and nodded quickly. "Yes, you let go first." Only then did she realize her gaffe and apologized profusely. "Sorry, I got too excited." "Fine." Jiu Huai rubbed his arm and looked at her in confusion. This woman looks so frail, how come she becomes so strong when she mentions the child? Xing Yinxi felt very complicated. She thought that finding Zhao Mar would help things develop further, but she got into a car accident on the way. Is it really such a coincidence? Xing Yinxi was puzzled and didn't understand how such a coincidence could happen. Unless. An evil thought flashed through her mind, but Xing Yinxi suffered a head injury and felt a sharp pain in her head, forcing her to stop thinking. Seeing her like this, Jiu Huai sighed helplessly. "Now that you've been in a car accident, don't think about those unnecessary things. You should rest and recover first. If not for yourself, at least think about the baby in your belly." Speaking of children, Xing Yinxi immediately nodded obediently. Jiu Huai breathed a sigh of relief. "By the way, I have met you so many times, it seems like we are destined to meet." Xing Yinxi curled the corners of her mouth. She has come to the hospital so many times, could there be no fate? "My name is Jiu Huai. I don't know why you come to the hospital so frequently, but since we've met so many times, let's make friends and get to know each other." Then he stretched out his hand and smiled gently at Xing Yinxi. Xing Yinxi felt a little embarrassed. She nodded, shook hands, and then quickly pulled away. "My name is Xing Yinxi." Jiu Huai was stunned for a moment, then smiled helplessly. "Are you shy with me?" Chapter 8 Intimate Photos. Not really. Xing Yinxi didn't know how to explain her current mental state to him. Ever since she got entangled with Fu Yuhan and got sick, her mentality has also quietly changed. Seeing her like this, Jiu Huai smiled and turned to talk about her illness. "I never thought that after such a serious car accident, you only suffered minor injuries." Hearing this, Xing Yinxi immediately became serious. "Will it harm my baby?" "It's nothing serious, your baby is very strong. Like her mother." Xing Yinxi breathed a sigh of relief when she learned that the child was fine. But when she thought of Fu Yuhan, the hope that had been burning in Xing Yinxi's heart became an unknown again. Would he allow himself to have her child? What will he do to me when he finds out about this? A series of questions lingered in her mind, making Xing Yinxi's face look much gloomier. Gu Huai saw that she was not very old, but she had a lot on her mind all day long, and she didn't show it on her face. I'm afraid it was a rough experience. Thinking of this, Gu Huai couldn't help but look at Xing Yinxi again. After pregnancy, it is best for the mother to keep a happy and comfortable mood, which is also helpful for the baby's health. Hearing this, Xing Yinxi was stunned for a moment, and then a hint of bitterness appeared on her face. Well, I'll try my best. Gu Huai pushed his glasses and his expression became a little complicated. Or, if you have any problems, you can tell me. After all, I am your doctor, and it is my duty to help you solve your psychological problems. Xing Yinxi smiled bitterly and said helplessly. Psychologically? Probably not. The suffering he endured cannot be summed up in a few simple psychological words. At this moment, the door was suddenly kicked open. Before Xing Yinxi could react, Fu Yuhan's angry face appeared in front of him. Xing Yinxi, you haven't even divorced me yet, but you've already found your next boyfriend, right? Listening to the man's angry words, Xing Yinxi was slightly stunned and spoke in confusion. What are you talking about? Oh, still pretending. Fu Yuhan's narrow eyes emitted a deep dark light. He glanced deeply at Gu Huai beside him and took out a stack of photos from his pocket. Look at what you have done. As he spoke, Fu Yuhan threw the photos in front of Xing Yinxi. The fluttering photos dazzled her eyes, and they rolled towards her with a man's tremendous anger. Xing Yinxi picked up the photo that fell in front of her, and her pupils shrank when she saw the intimate contact between her and Gu Huai in it. This isn't true. She has never done anything like this. These photos were all taken at different angles to create a very intimate feeling. Gu Huai next to him also picked up the photo and said with a frown. Sir, don't get excited. Nothing happened between Miss Xing and me, and these photos are all misplaced. Get out. Fu Yuhan's face was as cold as ice and he interrupted him mercilessly. Gu Huai, who was scolded by him, choked up, then looked at Xing Yinxi deeply, turned around and left. Xing Yinxi felt filled with guilt. There was obviously nothing going on between him and Gu Huai, yet he had to suffer such a thing for no reason. But Fu Yuhan thought that the worry between Xing Yinxi's brows was because she was worried about Gu Huai. You two really have a deep bond. I just asked you to separate from him, and you're so reluctant to let him go. I don't. Xing Yinxi retorted subconsciously. But Fu Yuhan didn't listen to her explanation at all. He pulled back the quilt and looked at her viciously. Xing Yinxi, do you think I have a very good temper, or that I am stupid and easy to fool? No, Yuhan. It feels terrible to be misunderstood by the person you love. Xing Yinxi felt like a huge rock was pressing on her heart, making it hard for her to breathe. Why doesn't he believe in himself? Looking at Xing Yinxi in front of him with red eyes and a stubborn look, Fu Yuhan felt a little relieved. But when he thought of what Xing Yinxi had done to him before, Fu Yuhan immediately suppressed the thought and sneered instead. Xing Yinxi, you are worthy of me trusting you. Don't you see what good things you have done before? Xing Yinxi knew what Fu Yuhan was talking about, so she slowly lowered her head, bit her lip and did not refute. Anyway, she had explained it to Fu Yuhan countless times before, but he never believed her. Now Xing Yinxi had long given up hope. But in Fu Yuhan's eyes, his compromise seemed guilty, so he became even more angry. Xing Yinxi, you've already found a new partner, why do you want me to stay with you for a week? Why don't you divorce me now? Don't you really want Yang Yang and I to be happy? Facing his sarcastic gaze, Xing Yinxi dodged silently. Now, she couldn't tell Fu Yuhan about Xinshin, but she was pregnant now. I am pregnant. Hearing this, a hint of relaxation appeared on Fu Yuhan's extremely angry face. What? I said. Xing Yinxi raised her eyes and looked at Fu Yuhan with sparkling eyes. Fu Yuhan, I'm pregnant. When Fu Yuhan heard the news of pregnancy, he was stunned, but then he reacted. The child belongs to that pretty boy in the hospital, right? He didn't believe that Xing Yinxi hated him so much that she would willingly bear his child. Facing his suspicion, Xing Yinxi just uttered a few words lightly. If you don't believe it, you can wait until the child is born and do a paternity test. Fu Yuhan didn't say anything, but the relaxed expression on her face betrayed her inner feelings. He didn't expect Xing Yinxi to be pregnant at this time. Now, he suddenly didn't know what to do. At this time, Zhu Yangyang, who had been eavesdropping outside the door, saw that something was wrong, so she quietly pushed the door open and asked inquiringly, "Yuhan, what are you and your sister talking about?" Seeing Zhu Yangyang get down to the ground, Fu Yuhan quickly came to his senses, hugged her nervously, and asked with concern, "Yangyang, why did you get up suddenly? Didn't the doctor tell you to have a good rest? Go back to bed and lie down." "But I miss you." Zhu Yangyang pouted, tugged at the corner of Fu Yuhan's clothes, and acted coquettishly. A smile spread across Fu Yuhan's face and he nodded lovingly. "Okay, then I'll go back to the ward to accompany you." Zhu Yangyang said a few words and Fu Yuhan turned around and went to accompany her. Before leaving, Zhu Yangyang secretly gave Xing Yinxi a provocative look. Xing Yinxi withdrew her gaze expressionlessly, suppressing the bitterness in her heart. But looking at their intimacy, Xing Yinxi still felt a lump in her throat and almost cried. When she thought of her child, Xing Yinxi took a deep breath, calmed herself down, and suppressed her inner grief. She has to be strong. The child is her only spiritual support, and she can do anything for the child. Chapter 9, Affair. Back in the ward, looking at Fu Yuhan's gentle eyes beside her, Zhu Yanyan's fingers unconsciously clenched nervously. She really didn't expect that bitch Xing Yinxi would get pregnant so quickly. It would be fine if she suspected someone else's child, but what she couldn't accept the most was that she was pregnant with Fu Yuhan's child. Is a dirty person like Xing Yinxi worthy of carrying Brother Fu's child? Zhu Yangyang hid these thoughts and looked at him softly. Fu Yuhan rubbed her head. "What's wrong?" Zhu Yanyan's eyes flickered twice. "Yuhan, what were you talking about with your sister just now? I hope I didn't disturb you by showing up suddenly." Seeing her somewhat guilty expression, Fu Yuhan's heart softened and he stretched out his arms to hug her. "What are you thinking about? Can the things I talked about with her be as important as you? That's not what I meant. I'm just curious about what you talked about with your sister." As she spoke, Zhu Yangyang blinked at him with an innocent look. "Nothing. The intimate photos of Xing Yinxi and another man were passed to me, so I went to question her. It's that simple." When talking about this matter, a layer of frost appeared on Fu Yuhan's face. Zhu Yangyang pursed her lips and spoke casually. Then wouldn't the child my sister is pregnant with also be from that man?" As soon as their voice fell, Zhu Yangyang immediately covered her mouth and said with some panic, "Yuhan, that's not what I meant. I said the wrong thing. Sister would never do such a thing. I'm just curious, my sister has been with you for 6 years, why did she suddenly agree to a divorce?" Zhu Yangyang wanted to explain, but the more she explained, the worse the situation became. But after hearing this, Fu Yuhan's face turned ugly again. He stood up suddenly and prepared to walk out the door. Zhu Yangyang held him back hypocritically. "Don't get excited. I'm just guessing. It would be bad if it hurts the relationship between you and your sister." Hearing this, Fu Yuhan turned around, and the expression on his face was so ugly that Zhu Yangyang was shocked. But as soon as he said this, Fu Yuhan's voice was still gentle. "Yang, listen to me, you don't have to get involved in this matter, just take good care of yourself. Don't forget, you are still in the hospital now, it's all this woman's doing." "All right." Zhu Yangyang pretended to nod pitifully, but after Fu Yuhan turned and left, she raised the corners of her mouth in satisfaction, with a crazy dark light in her eyes. "Xing Yinxi, you are dead." In the ward, Xing Yinxi was following the doctor's orders and doing some exercises to help stabilize the fetus. Thinking that the baby in her belly could soon save another life, Xing Yinxi's heart began to pound with nervousness. The soft and sticky little dumpling who would call her mother could finally survive. At this moment, Fu Yuhan suddenly appeared, looked at the smile on her face, and sneered. "Oh, you're so happy about being pregnant with a wild man's child." "I didn't, Fu Yuhan, I'm pregnant with your child." Xing Yinxi immediately straightened her expression and spoke seriously. But her words were of no use in front of him now, and instead made Fu Yuhan want to kill her even more. "Xing Yinxi, you lie all the time, aren't you tired?" The big hand touched Xing Yinxi's neck, and with a little force, Xing Yinxi began to have difficulty breathing and looked embarrassed. You let me go." Xing Yinxi struggled to pry his fingers apart before she was able to breathe slightly. Snort. Fu Yuhan swung her hand, and Xing Yinxi's body immediately fell heavily to one side. Fortunately, she was on the bed, so nothing happened to her. Soon, Xing Yinxi sat up, protecting her stomach. What do you want to do here? What do I want to do? Fu Yuhan smiled, moved closer to her, and stroked Xing Yinxi's lips with his rough fingertips, but the coldness in his eyes became colder. Xing Yinxi, since you are unkind, don't blame me for being unjust. As they were talking, several bodyguards suddenly came in from outside the door and took Xing Yinxi away without saying anything. Xing Yinxi panicked. Fu Yuhan, the doctor said that I must stay in the hospital for a few days before I can be discharged. If you do this, my child and I will be in danger. Fu Yuhan was not afraid at all, but sneered instead. You are such a lowly person, and you still expect me to care about your life or death. After he said this coldly, he disappeared from Xing Yinxi's sight. The noise they made was so loud that many people poked their heads out of the ward to see what was going on. Xing Yinxi bit her lips tightly, trying hard not to look so embarrassed. For the sake of the children, I have to endure it. After the bodyguard took Xing Yinxi into the car, he sent her directly away from the hospital. In the car, Xing Yinxi held her belly tightly, praying that the baby in her belly would be okay. After the struggle just now, Xing Yinxi had tried her best, after all. Baby, you must be strong, she muttered to herself. When they arrived at the Fu family, the bodyguard grabbed Xing Yinxi and drove her to the basement after entering the house. Xing Yinxi was shocked and spoke in disbelief. Fu Yuhan locked me up in the basement again. Now that Xing Yinxi is pregnant, he locked himself in the basement. One can imagine what his purpose is. Even though their relationship was not harmonious, Xing Yinxi never thought that one day Fu Yuhan would be so cruel to him. It was really beyond her imagination. The bodyguard remained cold throughout and ignored Xing Yinxi's words. Instead, he locked her in the basement and locked the door. With a bang, the basement door was locked tightly, and even the not-so-strong beam of sunlight disappeared. Xing Yinxi clenched her fingers tightly. The sudden darkness made her unable to adapt, but as long as she thought of her child, she would muster up the courage and grope to turn on the light switch in the basement. The light was not strong, emitting only a dim warm light, but it was enough for this basement. Xing Yinxi gritted her teeth. Fu Yuhan disliked her so much and wanted to kill her, but she just couldn't let him do that. Isn't it just a basement? Thinking of this, Xing Yinxi took a deep breath, calmed herself down, and searched the basement for any usable supplies. During the argument just now, all the communication equipment on her was taken away by the bodyguards. Now she is helpless. Being locked in the basement, no one would know even if he died. But after some searching, Xing Yinxi was disappointed to find that in the basement, not to mention communication equipment, even basic supplies for maintaining life were hard to find. This means that if Fu Yuhan doesn't let the servants give her food, she will starve to death here. As soon as the thought came to her mind, Xing Yinxi broke out in a cold sweat. She touched her belly with lingering fear, thinking that she had to survive in the basement with the child no matter what. Chapter 10, Imprisoned. Thinking of this, Xing Yinxi plucked up her courage and shouted outside the basement. Is there anyone here? There's no food in the basement. I'll starve to death if you don't give me food. As expected, after all, Xing Yinxi is currently Mrs. Fu. Even if she is imprisoned here by Fu Yuhan, the servants would not dare to starve her to death. But thinking of the murderous look on Fu Yuhan's face when he gave orders, the servants looked at each other, not knowing how to treat her. Finally, a servant who was more assertive came to the basement door with a bowl of porridge and some water. Looking at the food in front of her, Xing Yinxi frowned. I'm pregnant now, and eating these every day is not good for the growth of the baby in my belly. Seeing that Xing Yinxi was still not satisfied with their arrangement, a servant sneered and mocked her mercilessly. You've been locked up in the basement now. You're about to divorce Mr. Fu, and you still have the guts to negotiate with us? If you keep looking at us like that, we'll starve you to death in the basement. The world is a fickle place. Xing Yinxi is currently being abused every day by Fu Yuhan in the Fu family, and the servants have seen it all. Now that she has been thrown into the basement, naturally not many people are respectful to her. Looking at the light porridge and water in front of her, Xing Yinxi gritted her teeth, and finally took them away without saying a word. Although it is not nutritious enough, she has to eat it for the sake of her child. Ever since Xing Yinxi was taken to the basement, Fu Yuhan has not returned home for several days. In the ward, Zhu Yangyang spoke softly. Yuhan, I've been almost well these days, it's time for me to be discharged from the hospital. Fu Yuhan shook his head and said seriously. No, Yangyang, you were injured so badly before, so you should rest more in the hospital. But Zhu Yanyan's eyes flickered slightly, and she was thinking about how to tell Fu Yuhan that she wanted to be discharged from the hospital and go see Xing Yinxi. By the way, how is your sister doing recently? She is pregnant, so she needs to take care of herself more. When Fu Yuhan heard Xing Yinxi's name, a hint of impatience appeared on his face. Life is going well, why do you want to mention her? Seeing the displeasure in his brows, Zhu Yangyang happily relaxed her brows. She hugged Fu Yuhan's neck and called him affectionately. Oh, I'm just thinking that no matter what, my sister and you have a relationship. Even if you two want to divorce, it's better to part ways in peace. Somehow, listening to Zhu Yanyan's words, Fu Yuhan felt inexplicably irritated and could only nod to get away. Zhu Yangyang, who was standing by, was still making a fuss about being discharged from the hospital. The hospital is too stuffy. I don't want to stay here. Then I'll send someone to take you home and arrange 2 nurses to take care of you. Hearing this, Zhu Yangyang shook her head. No, I want you to take care of me. How about I go to your house and you take care of me? As soon as these words were spoken, Zhu Yangyang clearly felt Fu Yuhan's body stiffen. She realized that she had said the wrong thing and quickly apologized. I'm sorry Yuhan, I just said it casually, you won't be angry, right? Fu Yuhan shook his head, but his body was still a little stiff. Fine. Having said that, he gently loosened Zhu Yanyan's arm that was hanging around his neck. You take good care of yourself. When the doctor says you can be discharged, I will send someone to take you home. Don't worry, be good. Fu Yuhan kissed her on the forehead, turned around and left the hospital. But when seeing this scene, Zhu Yanyan's eyes revealed a hint of regret. Damn, I'm still a little impatient. I originally wanted to take advantage of the hospitalization to move to the Fu family, but I didn't expect him to refuse. It seems that I should take a long-term view. However, I just wonder how that bitch Xing Yinxi is doing in the Fu family now? In the basement of the villa. That day, Xing Yinxi looked at the food placed at the door of the basement and sighed helplessly. For several days, the servants of the villa only gave her a little water and a bowl of porridge a day. Although this ensured that she would not starve to death, Xing Yinxi clearly felt that she was thinner than before, and estimated that she had lost more than half of her weight. Touching her own slender arms, she could clearly feel the edges of the bones. Xing Yinxi pursed her lips and drank the porridge expressionlessly. He was thinner, which made the baby in his belly more obvious, and his bulging belly looked much bigger. I am already very thin now. If I continue like this, I am afraid I won't be able to hold on for a few more days. And these past few days, Xing Yinxi also knew clearly that Fu Yuhan had never come back once, and had not even shown his face. She couldn't help but sneer. Does Fu Yuhan really hate her to this extent? A sense of crisis rose in her heart. According to her current physical condition, she could only hold on for a few more days at most. But after a few days, even Xing Yinxi herself was not sure what she would become. Therefore, if Fu Yuhan doesn't come back in the next few days, Xing Yinxi will have to take new measures. She touched her belly, using her body temperature to feel the long jump of the little life inside her belly, and apologized silently in her heart. I'm sorry that I couldn't give you the best conditions when you first came into this world. I hope you don't be angry with me. But suddenly, there was a tiny knock on the basement door. Xing Yinxi's place was very quiet, so she heard it immediately and quickly opened the door. In front of her, a little maid looked at her with a somewhat embarrassed expression. Miss Xing, these are the chicken legs and some food I secretly left over from dinner. You're pregnant, so you should eat more. Looking at the food she stuffed into her mouth, Xing Yinxi took it with a feeling of being touched. Thanks. This little maid had just come to the Fu family not long ago, so Xing Yinxi didn't have much impression of her. I didn't expect that she was the only one who came to my aid when I was in trouble. You're welcome, Miss Xing, the maid said, watching to see if anyone was passing by. You can eat it secretly. If I stay here any longer, I'm afraid it will arouse suspicion. I'll leave first. After saying goodbye to the little maid, Xing Yinxi carefully carried the food back to the basement. Looking at the still hot food in front of her, Xing Yinxi couldn't help but burst into tears. Adding flowers to a bouquet does not bring any warmth, but sending charcoal in the snow keeps the heart warm. Although Xing Yinxi doesn't have much ability now, she will always remember this kindness in her heart. On the other side, Fu Yuhan was handling affairs in the company. These days, he was either staying in the company to handle affairs or in the hospital to accompany Zhu Yangyang. He didn't even go home. Seeing him like this, the assistant couldn't bear it and made a suggestion. Mr. Fu, you don't have to work so hard. Your health is more important. If something goes wrong with your body, no amount of money can make up for it. Listening to the assistant's words, Fu Yuhan gradually fell into deep thought. If it were in the past, he would not have fought so hard as he does now, but now, his entire family was destroyed and he was the only one left. Chapter 11, Beating a Dog Depends on Its Owner. If Zhu Yangyang hadn't pulled him out of that dark situation, he would probably have been left dead in the wilderness. Not to mention that he still has the energy left to avenge his family. Thinking of this, he became even more grateful to Zhu Yangyang and dialed the phone. Zhu Yanyan's gentle voice came from the other end of the phone. Yuhan, what's wrong? I missed your voice. Fu Yuhan's deep voice was full of magnetism. Whenever he was mentally unstable, he would calm down again when he heard Zhu Yanyan's voice. I miss you as well. As Zhu Yangyang was speaking, she thought of Xing Yinshi and tried to speak. Sister, have you been doing well at home recently? Why do you care about her so much? It seems like you care about her more than I do. Fu Yuhan raised his eyebrows and spoke softly, but he was actually shocked inwardly. He realized that he had been busy dealing with company matters these days and had not returned to the villa. I don't know what her current condition is. No, after all, you and your sister haven't broken off the engagement yet. If something happens before the engagement is broken off, it will delay the progress of your divorce. The smile on Zhu Yanyan's lips was a little stiff, and she couldn't help feeling a little depressed. Xing Yinshi, that bitch, has been occupying the title of Mrs. Fu for 6 years. Hasn't she heard enough? In order to prevent the two of them from getting married, she didn't hesitate to use such despicable means. It's really disgusting. Thinking of this, Zhu Yanyan's face didn't look very good, but her tone was still gentle. By the way, Yuhan, you've been busy at the company these days. You must be exhausted. Do you want me to make some nourishing soup for you to replenish your body? Hearing this, Fu Yuhan felt a little guilty. He said slowly, no need, Yang Yang, just take good care of yourself in the hospital. I will take care of my health. I am sorry that you have been with me for so many years without any status. Zhu Yangyang was delighted when she understood the guilt in Fu Yuhan's words. Although she was also very impatient about becoming Mrs. Fu, she still spoke with understanding. It's okay, Yuhan. I've survived 6 years. Do I still care about this little bit of time? Besides, even if I don't have a name, I'm willing to do it as long as I can be with you. Don't worry, Yang Yang. I will speed up the divorce process and won't let you wait too long. Then I'll wait for you, Yuhan. Zhu Yanyan's voice was tender and gentle, but on the other end of the phone, her expression was full of sinisterness and complacency. You see, men are like this, as long as you take the initiative to act pitiful, they will want to give you everything. Unfortunately, Xing Yinshi is not that kind of person. After hanging up the phone, Fu Yuhan realized that the divorce could not be delayed any longer. It just so happened that he hadn't been home for a long time, so it was time for him to go back and see if he was hungry. When he arrived at the Fu family, a feeling of death wafted over as he entered the door, causing Fu Yuhan to frown. He remembered that when he returned home before, there was always a faint woody scent in the house. It was his favorite smell and also a reflection of Xing Yinshi's careful home decoration. Now, because she was locked up in the basement, the smell had dissipated. For some reason, a feeling of irritation rose in my heart. Mr. Fu, you are back. The little maid couldn't wait to come to Fu Yuhan, her face full of worry. You should go and see madam. She hasn't been eating or sleeping well these past few days. She has lost a lot of weight. Moreover, she is pregnant and her body is even weaker. Hearing this, his pace quickened involuntarily. But when he reached the door of the basement, he suddenly stopped, surprised at his own anxiety. What is he in a hurry for? He asked himself in his heart. He knew clearly what Xing Yinshi had done to him before, so shouldn't he feel happy after hearing such things? And what is he so anxious about now? Thinking of this, Fu Yuhan took a deep breath, turned around nonchalantly, and looked at the little maid in front of him. Oh, and then? The little maid didn't react to his change and blinked blankly. What's going on? Wasn't he in a hurry just now? Why did he suddenly become a different person? Nothing happened. The little maid stammered and said with gritted teeth. Then do what you need to do. Fu Yu spoke in a cold voice, then turned and walked away from the basement door. Staring at his departing back, the little maid was confused and felt a little aggrieved. Being locked up in the basement would have been bad enough, but their husband still didn't care even though their wife was abused like this. Are men really cold-blooded animals? Just as he was thinking this, he heard mocking words from other servants. Now you know what it means to be the first to stick your head out, right? Har har, don't blame us for not reminding you. Xing Yinxi is so unpopular right now. If you speak up for her, you'll be scolded. You might even lose your job. Hearing this, the little maid clenched the corner of her clothes, glared at him fiercely, and then ran away. After Fu Yuhan returned home, he originally wanted to see Xing Yinxi, but he didn't see Xing Yinxi. He had been back for such a long time, but he hadn't accomplished anything. He began to doubt what he was doing. At dinner time, looking at the delicacies on the table, Fu Yuhan was about to start eating with an expressionless face, but out of the corner of his eye he saw a servant walking outside with a bowl of porridge and a bowl of water. Stop! Fu Yuhan called him. The servant was stunned. Boss Fu, are you calling me? That's your dinner, is that what you're holding in your hand? He frowned slightly. Although they were servants, the Fu family was a wealthy family and it was unlikely that they would serve their servants plain porridge for dinner. Hearing this, the servant quickly reacted and explained, "It's not my dinner, sir, it's my lady's." Halfway through his words, he seemed to feel that it was not honorable to fool Xing Yinxi with a bowl of porridge, and his face looked a little embarrassed. Unexpectedly, upon hearing this, Fu Yuhan slammed his chopsticks on the table and angrily asked, "What? You're going to give her this to eat?" Although Fu Yuhan expected that they would be harsh on Xing Yinxi, they never thought that they would be so harsh. Perhaps seeing that Fu Yuhan was too angry, the servant was stunned for a moment, and then begged for mercy. "Sir, we don't know how much to feed her, and you asked us to." He couldn't continue because he could clearly see that Fu Yuhan's expression was changing from shock to anger. You have to look at the owner when beating a dog. She is Mrs. Fu now, and you treat her like this. Faced with his questioning gaze, the man lowered his head guiltily, feeling very flustered. "Sir, we didn't mean to do that." He didn't know how to explain so that he wouldn't vent his anger on himself. "Move everything off the dining table to the basement." Fu Yuhan spoke angrily and then rushed to the basement. Chapter 12. Why are you here? He kicked the door open with a bang and hurried downstairs to check on her condition. I saw Xing Yinxi lying on the bed. The bed looked extremely shabby because it had no extra facilities. It even creaked and shook when one turned over. When she heard him coming, Xing Yinxi was stunned for a moment. She was just wondering who kicked the door open, and even naively imagined for a second that a messenger of justice would come to rescue her. But after seeing Fu Yuhan's face, her fantasy was shattered again. Yes, besides him, who else would have such a unique way of opening the door? Fu Yuhan was extremely angry at first, but after seeing his face, he calmed down inexplicably. He raised the corners of his mouth, and at some point, his mocking expression returned to his face. After being abused like this, you didn't even know how to stand up and resist. Listening to his ridicule, Xing Yinxi pursed her lips and said nothing. Now she eats very little every day, and even getting out of bed is a luxury. How can she have the energy to argue? Seeing her silently lowering her head and not saying anything, Fu Yuhan felt a lot more relieved. He snorted coldly, then waved his hand, and the servants quickly brought the food to her. Eat it. As soon as Fu Yuhan finished speaking, she picked up the chicken leg and started to devour it. It wasn't her fault. She was so hungry that she almost fainted. She felt that if she didn't eat, she might not have the strength to open her eyes tomorrow. So now she didn't want to argue with Fu Yuhan, she just wanted to fill her stomach first. Fu Yuhan just frowned at her, watching her wolfing down the food in disbelief. As I recall, she was always elegant and cute since she was little, and she had never been so messy when eating as she was now. While deep in thought, Xing Yinxi suddenly started coughing. Fu Yuhan quickly winked at the servant, who hurriedly handed her some water. Seeing that she finished drinking the water and stopped coughing, Fu Yuhan said another sentence. Like a starving ghost, but no one is competing with you for food. After eating a few chicken legs, Xing Yinxi was able to maintain basic rationality in the face of food. She picked up the chopsticks and picked up some vegetables, eating very balancedly. After all, only with balanced nutrition can the baby in the belly thrive. She also knew that such opportunities did not come every day. If Fu Yuhan was gone one day, or if he suddenly changed his mind and wanted to starve her for 3 or 5 days, she would have no way to deal with it. So for now, she eats whatever she can. Fu Yuhan raised his eyebrows and looked at her. From the moment he came in until now, Xing Yinshi had never paid any attention to him or even looked at him except when she was eating. He suddenly felt a little impatient, so he snatched her chopsticks and forced her to look at him. Are you deaf when I talk to you? Seeing the chopsticks being snatched away, Xing Yinshi looked at her, but her eyes were full of impatience. What do you want me to say to you? This question stumped Fu Yuhan. He was stunned for a moment, then frowned and spoke. You ignored everything I said to you. Hearing this, although Xing Yinshi was displeased, she hid her emotions and repeated it expressionlessly. After being abused like this, he didn't even know how to stand up and resist. Eat it. Like a starving ghost, but no one is competing with you for food. I'll tell you. Fu Yuhan finally couldn't hold it in any longer. Xing Yinshi, what are you doing? There was no ripple in her calm eyes, and she spoke in a flat tone. I am repeating your words to prove that I have not ignored your words. Fu Yuhan. Seeing that he didn't say anything, Xing Yinshi swiftly took the chopsticks from his hand and continued eating. He suddenly didn't know what else he should say. It was not until Xing Yinshi's stomach could no longer hold any more food that she gently rubbed her stomach, and her expression relaxed a little. This was the first time she had a full meal after being hungry for so many days. It's not easy. Looking at the hollows on her cheeks, Fu Yuhan could tell that she had been starving these days. He wanted to say something to prove that he didn't mean it, but as soon as he said it, it became, you don't even know how to open your mouth when you're being abused. You really deserve it. Hearing this, Xing Yinshi suddenly looked at him and said something out of the blue. Mr. Fu, ever since you locked me in the basement, you have ignored me and never came back. I have been staying here for so many days and no one cares about me. Who can I talk to? After hearing these words, Fu Yuhan finally realized that he had not been back for so many days. Seeing this, he spoke somewhat unnaturally. There's a lot going on at the company these days, But halfway through his words, Fu Yuhan suddenly realized that he was explaining to her unconsciously. He suddenly became sober. Sitting in front of him was his enemy. Why does he have patience with his enemies? It's good enough that I can give her something to eat. He immediately stopped talking, and then spoke with a hint of joking. You cheated on me and got pregnant with someone else's child. Isn't it right for me to lock you up? How dare you blame me for the problem? Faced with his mocking expression, Xing Yinshi suddenly fell silent. She had told him so many times, but he still thought it was her child with someone else. She suddenly lost the desire to speak. But in Fu Yuhan's view, her silence was another sign of her guilty conscience. Fu Yu sneered coldly. Look, this woman is always like this. Whenever I expose her lies, she always keeps her head down in silence. But suddenly, Xing Yinshi's words reached Fu Yuhan's ears. I said, this is your child, do you believe it? Facing her eyes, Fu Yuhan suddenly felt flustered, but he still denied it for some reason. Do you think I will believe it? Have to. She pursed her lips. She would never clarify this issue again in the future. No matter how many times she said it, Fu Yuhan would never believe her. But it doesn't matter. The two of them have already quarreled to this extent. Does she still care whether Fu Yuhan believes it or not? As long as I know my child is safe, nothing else matters. They were greeted with silence again. Looking at the food that was gradually getting cold, Fu Yuhan waved his hand, signaling the servants to send the food out. But he ignored Xing Yinshi's reluctance to eat. After the servants left, they consciously left the basement door ajar so that no light could come in and the basement became pitch dark again. Xing Yinshi casually turned on the small light next to her, and the warm yellow light shone on her face, giving her facial features a soft color. Xing Yinshi's facial features have always been bright, but after going through all these things, her eyes no longer have the sharpness they once had, and are replaced by dark eyes as black as ink. People who don't know her may think that she is being reserved, but only she herself knows that her silence now is nothing but a helpless compromise with life. Chapter 13, Like his child so much. Fu Yuhan looked at her face and suddenly felt a little dazed, as if they had returned to their youth. But the reality tells them clearly. They can never go back. After a while, Xing Yinshi suddenly spoke. Do you really want to kill me, Fu Yuhan? Fu Yuhan came back to his senses from his reverie and looked at her. He suddenly became angry. Who killed whom first? Well, tell me. As he spoke, his big hand slid across her neck, as if he was going to strangle her in the next second. Xing Yinxi trembled all over. Now that she was pregnant, she couldn't stand Fu Yuhan's tormenting her like this. Seeing that she didn't say anything, Fu Yuhan became more and more excited. If you hadn't destroyed our family, would we be like this now? Are you pretending to be a victim to try to win my sympathy? Miss Xing, you think I'm too stupid? Xing Yinxi lowered her eyes, and unknowingly her eyes were filled with tears. Did she want this? Was all this her fault? But her behavior made Fu Yuhan even more annoyed. He pursed his lips and spoke with all his impatience. So I'm warning you, don't play any tricks, I have 100 ways to make you miserable. Facing his threat, Xing Yinxi curled up the corners of her mouth lightly, completely let it go, and her tone became much more relaxed. Fu Yuhan, after this week, we will get divorced. Then I will never disturb you and Zhu Yangyang again. As she spoke, Xing Yinxi put her hand on her stomach. By then, she would find a place alone to give birth to the child and save Xinxin, and her mission in this life would be accomplished. Looking at her melancholy expression, Fu Yuhan read a hint of smile on her face. A huge rage rose in Fu Yuhan's heart. She was the one who came to his family, and she was the one who pestered him not to divorce. Now that she has a new love and has found her next boyfriend, can she divorce him openly and be with that man with peace of mind? He suddenly became extremely angry. He had suffered so much and had been entangled with her until now. Why could it end because of her light words? Could she abandon everything before and live a happy life with another man? He doesn't allow it. Thinking of this, he suddenly stood up and sneered. Xing Yinxi, you are dreaming. Hearing this, Xing Yinxi raised her head in astonishment and looked at him in surprise, not understanding why he changed his mind. What do you mean? As she spoke, Xing Yinxi's tone unconsciously turned cold. Fu Yuhan sneered and pinched her chin with his big hand, and the force suddenly tightened. You want a divorce? Do I have to follow your wishes? There is no such good thing in the world, Xing Yinxi, don't you think you deserve it? He raised his chin, said sarcastically, and threw his hand away suddenly. Xing Yinxi lost her balance and fell to the side. She subconsciously protected her stomach with her hands. Oh, I'm telling you, don't even think about having a carefree life with that bastard in your belly and other men. No way. Xing Yinxi pursed her lips tightly, thinking about the man's words, and didn't understand what he was thinking about that caused his expression to change suddenly. Didn't he want to divorce her before? Why did he suddenly change his mind? Before she had time to think about it, Fu Yuhan's cold words were like a needle, piercing her heart with every word. Without my permission, you can't divorce me. As for the bastard in your belly, I can't let her live in this world. What did you say? She spoke in disbelief. Are you crazy? Fu Yuhan, you are simply a lunatic. This is their own flesh and blood, how could Fu Yuhan be so cruel? I'm crazy, that's why I let you get pregnant with someone else's child, Xing Yinxi, why didn't I realize you're such a bitch before? Faced with his ridicule, Xing Yinxi refused to listen to a word. All she could think about now was her child. Isn't it for the sake of her children that she has held on until now? Since Fu Yuhan doesn't want to keep the child, then what's the point of everything she does? Thinking of this, Xing Yinxi forced herself to suppress her negative emotions and then spoke with a sob. Fu Yuhan, I beg you, please let the child go. The child is innocent. You can do whatever you want to me, just come at me. Fu Yuhan was about to turn around, but when he heard this, he turned his head again and said, What did you say? For the sake of the child, I can do anything for you. Facing the man's inquiring gaze, Xing Yinxi was shaking like a sieve, but she still forced herself to stand straight. Fu Yu sneered coldly, and his big hands slid towards the inner clothes without hesitation, and wandered around without restraint. How about this? Xing Yinxi shuddered and said nothing. The man seemed even more unsatisfied, and continued with a smile, What about this? As he spoke, he was already teasing her sensitive areas. Xing Yinxi panicked, Fu Yuhan, I'm pregnant, you can't. I didn't realize before that you were so interested in a bastard. Fu Yuhan's expression became colder and colder. Finally, he withdrew his hand and looked at Xing Yinxi sobbing with a frosty face. Xing Yinxi, there's still people waiting for you. After saying that, he left without a trace of neatness. But the profound Xing Yinxi leaned against the wall, feeling a sense of powerlessness. She felt so tired. But for the sake of her children, she had no choice. Except for the basement, Fu Yu looked coldly at everyone. Then, his eyes focused on the little maid who had just reminded him that Xing Yinxi was not in good condition. You, come here. The little maid who was called out took 2 steps forward tremblingly, her heart beating fast, wondering what the gentleman in front of her wanted to do. The servants nearby had faces full of gloating, thinking that the little maid's words were too direct, causing her to be kicked out. But the next second, Fu Yuhan suddenly spoke. Except you, everyone else should leave. Hearing this, all those people were stunned. Even the little maid was stunned and didn't react to what was happening. Seeing that they didn't move, Fu Yuhan repeated irritably, I told you to get out. You are fired. Don't you understand? Seeing his murderous expression, they were frightened and felt bad for why they were kicked out. They had no choice but to pack up their things and prepare to leave. He called his assistant and asked him to handle the matter of driving these people away and recruiting new people, then he pulled the little maid aside. You will be responsible for Xing Yinxi's daily life from now on. The little maid blinked, seemingly not understanding. Sir, do you mean to bring your wife up from the basement and take good care of her? No. She can only stay in the basement. Do you understand? Fu Yuhan suddenly became angry. The little maid shrank her neck and nodded weakly, oh. But Fu Yuhan seemed to have thought of something, and a hint of sarcasm flashed across his eyes. Remember to feed her more food, don't let her starve. Chapter 14, Hunger Strike. The little maid didn't know what the smile on Fu Yuhan's face meant, so she just nodded. After Fu Yuhan gave these instructions, he left without any mercy without staying at Fu's house. The little maid kept Fu Yuhan's words in mind and came to the basement. Looking at Xing Yinxi lying flat on the bed facing the ceiling, she said with some heartache. Madam, are you hungry now? Do you need me to feed you something? Hearing this, Xing Yinxi's lips trembled, as if she had thought of something, and spoke resolutely. I don't want to eat, so don't bring it to me. She is going on a hunger strike. Didn't Fu Yuhan want to have an abortion? Xing Yinxi wanted to see if he could be so cruel as to kill 2 people. Hearing this, the little maid looked at her in confusion, not understanding why she suddenly changed her attitude. Didn't you want to eat more before? Why don't you want to eat now? Confused, she nodded and retreated. The door of the basement was slowly closed. Xing Yinxi stroked the baby in her belly and sighed softly. My child, I may not be capable, but I will try my best to protect you. After Fu Yuhan left home, he went to the hospital. As soon as he entered the door, he saw Zhu Yangyang lying on the hospital bed. Seeing him coming, a fleeting trace of panic flashed across Zhu Yanyan's face. Yuhan, why are you here suddenly? Fu Yuhan frowned, not noticing the panic on her face, and asked, what's wrong? You don't welcome me. No way, Zhu Yangyang hugged his waist and hid her panic. You never told me beforehand every time you came, so I wasn't prepared. Hearing this, Fu Yuhan rubbed her head affectionately. Okay, then Yangyang, I will tell you in advance before I come to see you next time. We. Zhu Yangyang acted coquettishly and threw herself into his arms with a smile. After being together for a while, Fu Yuhan left. But as she stared at his leaving back, the smile on Zhu Yanyan's lips faded. Then she took out the cell phone hidden under her pillow and called again. Don't worry, Auntie, everything is going on normally. Since the last time Fu Yuhan came home, for several days in a row, he came home on time every day, saying that he was working, but he stayed in the basement most of the time. Mr. Fu, my wife has been on a hunger strike recently and refuses to eat anything. The little maid said with a sad face. At first, Xing Yinxi refused to eat, and the little maid thought she just ate too much at the first meal and didn't want to eat anymore. But after fighting for a long time, Xing Yinxi didn't eat a single bite, which made her very anxious. Fu Yuhan raised his eyebrows and walked through the door to the basement. What are you messing with me about, ho? His big hand pinched her chin and applied a little force. A thin layer of sweat immediately broke out on Xing Yinxi's forehead, revealing a painful expression. This cannot be blamed on her. After all, her body is too weak now. The slightest disturbance would make Xing Yinxi unable to cope. Xing Yinxi turned her head slightly and ignored his words. Seeing that he didn't say anything, Fu Yuhan was not angry, but he still had an unpredictable smile on his face, which made Xing Yinxi break out in a cold sweat. Xing Yinxi, what's your new trick? Are you trying to get my attention by going on a hunger strike? Hearing this, Xing Yinshi showed a hint of mockery on her face and retorted mercilessly. If that's the case, then why didn't I catch your attention by fasting during the week when I was locked in the basement and you didn't come? After these words were spoken, Fu Yuhan felt speechless for a while, but facing Yi's fixed gaze, Fu Yuhan finally spoke. You have so many tricks up your sleeve, who knows what you're up to? Hearing this, Xing Yinshi sneered and stopped talking. But her coldness angered Fu Yuhan. He frowned and continued to apply force with his fingers. I'm talking to you, are you mute? If you talk to me, I have to pay attention to you? Can I ignore you? Seeing that he was forcing herself to speak, Xing Yinshi didn't give him a good look and retorted bluntly. Hearing his tone, Fu Yuhan felt a little puzzled. When they were getting a divorce, Xing Yinshi's tone was calm. Why is it that now that I say I don't want a divorce, she has become so tough? He frowned and stared at her with some dissatisfaction. So, you are on a hunger strike with me now and you won't eat. Fu Yuhan's thin lips parted and his cool voice did not carry a trace of warmth, but it made Xing Yinshi feel a chill. She straightened her back. That's right, Fu Yuhan, don't think you can give me a sweet date after giving me a slap in the face. I won't fall for that. If you really wanted me to have a good meal, you wouldn't have left me in the basement for a week without paying any attention to me. You only showed your kindness belatedly after I had been hungry for a week. This is just hindsight. Fu Yuhan's brows gradually frowned and he looked at her with some displeasure. He didn't expect that Xing Yinshi actually thought of him like this, and subconsciously explained, I didn't expect those servants would treat you like this. Oh, so just give me a bowl of porridge and a glass of water a day until I'm too hungry to bear it anymore, and then you show up, right? Seeing that he was not listening to him at all, Fu Yuhan suddenly became a little annoyed. He opened his mouth to say something, but then he realized that he was explaining to her, and he suddenly felt very bored. Who does she think she is? Do I need to explain my actions to her? Thinking of this, his tone turned cold again. Xing Yinshi, don't refuse a toast and then drink a penalty. I told you to eat well, so you should eat. Don't let others think that the Fu family deliberately mistreats you and starves you to death. Har har, Xing Yinshi suddenly laughed, but her tone was a little sad. If that's the case, then it's good. It will also let outsiders see what kind of person Fu Yuhan is. Xing Yinshi. Fu Yuhan was angered by her words and slapped her. Xing Yinshi tilted her head and her body hit the wall uncontrollably. But she was not surprised by the man's actions. Instead, I feel a little disappointed. You have to drive me crazy, right? How come the Xing family has a daughter like you? Faced with his questioning, Xing Yinshi just smiled faintly and ignored him. Seeing that she ignored him, Fu Yuhan rubbed his eyebrows with a headache and continued. What do you want in exchange for eating? What I want is simple, just let me go. As soon as she finished speaking, Xing Yinshi stammered and spoke again. With my children. Fu Yuhan's gaze was deep. He looked Xing Yinshi up and down with his narrow eyes, and suddenly laughed. Okay, if you want to keep the baby, then eat well and I'll allow it. Xing Yinshi didn't expect Fu Yuhan's expression to change so quickly. She was slightly stunned and asked tentatively. Chapter 15 Abortion. Are you telling the truth? Nature. Fu Yuhan nodded stiffly, then brought the food on the table to her. But if you don't eat, you won't be able to control the baby in your belly. As soon as he finished speaking, Xing Yinshi felt something in her heart and immediately picked up the food and started eating. In fact, she hadn't eaten for most of the day and as a pregnant woman, she was naturally very hungry. If it weren't for the confrontation with Fu Yuhan, she would have eaten long ago. Seeing her eating obediently, the hostility in Fu Yuhan's eyes dissipated a lot. After a while, Xing Yinshi finished all the food, and the sadness in her eyes disappeared for the most part. Seeing this, Fu Yuhan stood up and left, and the maid behind her quickly cleaned up the plate that Xing Yinshi had eaten from and brought it over. Looking at the closed door of the basement, Xing Yinshi sighed. I really don't know when this kind of day will end. After Fu Yuhan left, he received a call from Zhu Yangyang. Yuhan, the doctor said I can be discharged from the hospital. Can you come pick me up? Hearing this, Fu Yuhan agreed without hesitation. Okay, I'll be there right away. When they arrived at the hospital, Fu Yuhan saw Zhu Yang who had already prepared herself, and hurried over to greet her. Although you can go out now, you have just recovered from your illness, so you still need to be careful. Stay at home and don't run around. Alas, I'm not a glass doll. I've just been discharged from the hospital after a few days of rest, but you still want me to stay at home. I'll be suffocated. Zhu Yangyang pouted her lips in dissatisfaction. Seeing her like this, Fu Yuhan smiled helplessly. Okay, then tell me where you want to go in advance, and I'll go with you. Zhu Yangyang smiled and nodded. Yuhan, you are so nice. The two got into the car while talking. On the way, Zhu Yangyang had been holding back words, and at this moment she finally asked tentatively. By the way, Yuhan, my sister has been locked up in the basement for so long. Is there any serious problem? Although she said so, Zhu Yanyan's eyes were shining with excitement, and she wished that Xing Yinshi would die in the basement immediately. No, Fu Yuhan shook his head, turned the steering wheel and said, she is in good health at the moment, but she wants to keep the child. When he said this, a hint of coldness flashed in Fu Yuhan's eyes. Zhu Yangyang hid her reluctance in her heart and pretended to understand. Thank you for your hard work. It must be tiring to deal with the things between you two. It's okay, Yangyang. So, are you going to keep your sister's child? Zhu Yangyang pretended to speak calmly, but her fingers clenched unconsciously. Hearing this, Fu Yuhan snorted lightly, with a flash of mockery in his eyes. Don't you even consider whose bastard she is pregnant with? How can I let that child survive in this world? And you? After she gets a few days and her body becomes more stable, I will arrange an abortion. I see. Zhu Yangyang covered her mouth in fear, but it blocked the corners of her mouth from curling up wildly. Then Yuhan, you must remember to be gentle when the time comes, and don't make her too sad. After all, children will always be a fetter for women. At this point, Zhu Yanyan's face turned red, and she couldn't help but hook her fingers around Fu Yuhan's belt, and said shyly. Actually, I also want Yuhan and I to have a child that belongs to both of us. The car was parked downstairs at this time. Hearing this, Fu Yuhan stepped on the brakes, turned off the engine, sighed slowly, and said gently. Yangyang, I understand your thoughts, but you have to know that now is not a good time. Before she finished her words, Zhu Yangyang grabbed his hand and said sincerely. I understand you. It won't be too late for us to talk about having children after you're done with this busy period. Well, the important thing is that I want to give you a status. After you have the status, then we can talk about having children. Fu Yuhan couldn't help but be moved by such a virtuous person like Zhu Yangyang. Zhu Yangyang is really a very good girl. After seeing Zhu Yangyang off, he thought so in his heart. When she got home, Zhu Yangyang changed her gentle demeanor in front of Fu Yuhan and quickly threw her luggage on the ground, and the servant next to her quickly picked it up. Yangyang, are you back? As soon as she saw him coming back, Zhu Ruoyan greeted him with a smile on her face. Yes, you don't know that I was so tired pretending to be exhausted in the hospital. It was nothing serious, but Fu Yuhan insisted that I follow the doctor's advice and stay in the hospital for a full week before letting me leave. Although she was complaining, Zhu Yanyan's lips were filled with a happy smile when she spoke. Har har, that's enough. You know that Mr. Fu loves you. But after hearing this, Zhu Yangyang thought of something and spoke with some displeasure. Humph, Fu Yuhan only loves me, and Xing Yinshi is still trying to keep his heart with a child. She really doesn't know how high the sky is and how deep the earth is. Don't worry, Yangyang, I will have someone make arrangements for her and will definitely not let her have an easy time. Hearing this, Zhu Yanyan's face was filled with smiles again, and she hugged Zhu Ruoyan and laughed. Thank you, Aunt. Fu Yuhan returned to the villa. This is the third day in a row that he has returned. I asked the servant next to me, how is her diet recently? Is it regular? Madam has been eating regularly recently, Mr. Fu, don't worry. Hearing this, a smile flashed across Fu Yuhan's face. In that case, that would be great. Xing Yinshi was still counting sheep out of boredom in the basement, but suddenly she heard a noisy sound coming from upstairs, as if someone had come in. She was wondering when she found that the basement door was opened. Then several people came in and took her upstairs. She suddenly realized something was wrong. Who are you and why did you arrest me? But they did not answer Xing Yinshi's words. They just dragged her upstairs without saying a word. Xing Yinshi was not as strong as these men, so she was forced to be taken to the first floor. The feeling of rebuilding the sunshine made Xing Yinshi feel dazed, but before she could react, Fu Yuhan's mocking voice rang in her ears. Why, you can't walk after being locked up for a few days, and you still need someone to go down and invite you. Xing Yinshi looked at him and spoke cautiously. What do you want to do? She has been locked in the basement for so long and there has been no trouble. But on this day, Fu Yuhan pulled the person out without even saying hello. Xing Yinshi could guess without thinking that it was not a good thing. Seeing her alert look, Fu Yuhan did not explain, but just glanced at the people around him, and they immediately walked forward as instructed. What are you going to do? Xing Yinshi let out a louder roar than before, and backed away desperately to distance himself from them. But her actions were like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. In the eyes of those people, it was futile. Xing Yinshi, I advise you not to move, or you will not only hurt the child, but also yourself. Chapter 16 Fight with you. Hearing this, Xing Yinshi was stunned, then yelled. Fu Yuhan, you lied to me, you liar, you said you wouldn't have any ideas about my child. Fu Yuhan looked at her coldly, and seeing how anxious she was, he just curled his lips and smiled. You don't think I'd be so broad-minded as to let you bear someone else's bastard, do you? Xing Yinshi, I'm lucky I didn't beat you to death, so you should just quit while you're ahead. Listening to his words, Xing Yinshi bit her lower lip tightly and glared at him angrily, as if she wanted to tear him apart and eat him. Fu Yuhan was stunned by her look, but then he immediately reacted and sneered. You feel scared now, but why don't you feel scared when you're with others? Fu Yuhan, let me repeat myself. I am pregnant with your child. Xing Yinshi roared in despair, tears welling up in his eyes, his eyeballs bloodshot, and this roar was mixed with his disappointment in Fu Yuhan. She thought that they would go their separate ways after their divorce, but she didn't expect things to turn out like this. The people around were also stunned. They turned around to look at Fu Yuhan's face, not knowing what to do. In fact, Fu Yuhan's face was also very ugly. He didn't expect Xing Yinshi to insist that the child was his. To be honest, he didn't intend to pay any attention to it, nor did he intend to believe it. Following Fu Yuhan's gesture, those people took a few steps forward and pinned Xing Yinshi down without saying a word. Those people were sweating anxiously. Among them, a doctor in a white coat came over and spoke respectfully to Xing Yinshi. Ms. Shen, abortion surgery is actually quite painful. If you are so excited and don't cooperate, it is very likely that your body will be injured. It is not a cost-effective deal, so you should calm down and consider your body. Consider her body. Xing Yinshi suddenly laughed. She only had about half a year to live, so why would she still consider it? What is there to pity about a worthless life like hers that is almost at the end of its life? Now she doesn't want anything else except to give birth to the child. Thinking of this, she took a deep breath, then suddenly, with strength from nowhere, she used the strength of the arm that was restraining her to kick the doctor hard. The doctor was kicked unexpectedly and fell backwards, screaming. Arr! Xing Yinshi took advantage of their failure to react and slammed his legs into their lower bodies. Arr! A second scream was heard. Xing Yinshi grabbed the scissors next to her with lightning speed and held them tightly in her hand. If you dare to take another step forward, I will make things difficult for all of you. Everyone was shocked. They didn't expect Xing Yinshi to react so strongly to the abortion issue. Fu Yuhan's face was also very gloomy. He didn't expect that Xing Yinshi could do this for Guy. What's so good about that man that Xing Yinshi would risk her life for him? Fu Yuhan was puzzled and looked at Xing Yinshi, whose expression became increasingly uglier. Xing Yinshi, what on earth are you making a fuss about? He couldn't help but yell. But when Xing Yinshi heard this, she sneered twice and laughed like crazy. Am I the one making a scene, or are you the ones who pushed me into a desperate situation? I just want to protect my child. What have I done wrong? I don't disagree with the divorce, it's you who's making a scene. Without waiting for him to say anything, Xing Yinshi raised the scissors and stabbed her arm fiercely. Xing Yinshi. Even though Fu Yuhan usually had no expression, he couldn't help but be horrified when he saw her preparing to hurt herself. Xing Yinshi didn't hesitate and stabbed his arm a second time. Fu Yuhan, are you going to keep the child or not? As he spoke, Xing Yinshi stabbed him a third time. As the three knives were stabbed, blood gushed out, staining Xing Yinshi's white dress like a blooming blood-red flower. Okay, I won't have an abortion. Stop it now. Fu Yuhan almost spoke through gritted teeth. You are serious? What if I regret it? Fu Yuhan's face turned red with excitement. If I lie, I will die. After hearing him say that, Xing Yinshi breathed a sigh of relief, then let go of the scissors, and the scissors slipped from her fingertips. After what happened just now, Xing Yinshi was extremely weak at this moment. Looking at the blood flowing beside her, her eyes went dark, her legs went weak, and she fell to the ground uncontrollably. What are you standing there for? Help! Fu Yuhan was extremely anxious and quickly gave instructions to the doctor next to him. The doctor finally reacted, nodded, and quickly performed first aid, then carefully bandaged the wound. Mr. Fu, my wife is in very poor health right now. I'm afraid she can't stand any more shocks. If this happens twice more, her health might be irreparably damaged. Fu Yuhan listened to this, and a hint of impatience flashed across his eyes. I understand. Take good care of her first. Yes. The doctor's footsteps gradually faded away, and Fu Yuhan frowned. He doesn't understand. It's just a child, what's the big deal? Or was it that being pregnant with the doctor's child was such a precious opportunity for her that she had to seize it? As soon as this thought came to mind, Fu Yuhan couldn't help but sneer, but the next second, an even more turbulent wave erupted in his heart. This woman actually had the audacity to cheat on him when they were still together and still loved him so deeply. He really underestimated her abilities. Thinking of this, a hint of mockery appeared in the man's eyes, but he couldn't help but walk out of the room. Looking at the group of doctors busying around in the basement, Fu Yuhan felt annoyed. The person is not dead, why are you so busy? Hearing this, they hurriedly stopped and looked at him respectfully, wondering what Fu Yuhan was up to today. Sometimes they take good care of the person, and they say there's no need to make a fuss about the person's life. Sometimes they take care of the person a little carelessly, and they threaten to replace him. Although they felt helpless, they couldn't bear it. Do what you need to do. Seeing that they stopped again, Fu Yuhan felt uncomfortable and waved his hands in annoyance. Afterwards, Fu Yuhan couldn't help himself and walked towards the basement. On the bed, the woman lay there quietly, her pale face showing her weakness. Looking at the hollow on her cheek, Fu Yuhan looked at the food that Xing Yunxi had hardly touched beside him, and gave instructions to the little maid behind him. Remember to let him eat 3 meals a day normally, and don't skip a single bite. Yes, sir. The little maid nodded quickly. Fu Yuhan ordered again, you go out first, and leave the door ajar before you leave. Chapter 17 for the children. The whole environment finally became dark until the little maid left. Fu Yuhan looked at the person on the bed and sighed slowly. He didn't want to think about the previous vase anymore. Every time he thought about it, he felt like his head was being pricked by needles. Now seeing Xing Yunxi lying quietly in bed sleeping, his mood improved a lot. But she was not spiritual after all because she didn't speak. Fu Yuhan watched her for a while but couldn't figure out anything. Instead, he thought over and over again about how Xing Yunxi risked her life for her and Ji Huaihuai's child. He stood up irritably, turned around and left the basement. What on earth was I doing just now? Why did I run to the basement and watch her for so long? Why should I pity a cheating woman? As a result, he was gone for a week. Fu Yuhan told himself in his heart that there was no need to care so much about a cheating woman. As for whether she was dead or alive in the basement, or happy or not, it had nothing to do with him. The little maid also watched Xing Yunxi eat as usual during these few days. After what happened before, Xing Yunxi seemed even weaker than before. Seeing how thin she was, the little maid was afraid that she would be blown down by the wind. Miss Shen, have you felt better recently? She couldn't help but show concern from the side. Yeah, much better, thank you. These past few days, she also noticed that Fu Yuhan had not been here, but she felt at ease. Rather than asking me to have an abortion when he comes, it would be better for me to be dead and never appear in front of her again. That's fine. It's getting late. Madam, you should go to bed first. After she finished eating, the maid put away the food tray and got up and left the basement. The little maid packed up her things and completed her tasks for the day. She breathed a sigh of relief and wanted to take a rest, but she felt a little greedy. Looking at the hamburger on the phone, I had the urge to go out and buy one for my wife as well. After all, eating this kind of high-calorie food will make you gain weight more easily. Madam, you are so thin, you really should eat more. Thinking of this, the little maid went out. After buying the goods and preparing to go home, it was already dark. The little maid crossed an alley and prepared to go back. But the next second, a masked man suddenly appeared in front of her, which scared her. Who are you? Facing the panicked eyes of the little maid, the man just smiled and then showed a smug smile. Girl, you are the little maid of the Fu family, the one next to Xing Yunxi. Hearing this, although the little maid didn't know what he wanted to do, she still took 2 steps back involuntarily and spoke cautiously. What is your purpose? Don't be nervous, I won't hurt you, the man said as he took 2 steps forward and approached her. I came to you tonight just to give you a piece of advice. As soon as he finished speaking, the man suddenly pulled out a dagger and stabbed the little maid fiercely. R. The little maid was so frightened that her face turned pale and she held her head with her hands to protect herself. But as the man stopped moving, the little maid suddenly realized that the man did not stab her with the knife, but stabbed the wall behind her. Even so, the little maid couldn't help but tremble. The man smiled even more happily. If you know what's good for you, just quit your job today and get as far away from home as possible. If you do this, this will be your reward. As he spoke, the man took out a thick stack of banknotes from his pocket and stuffed it into the maid's bag. Seeing that she still had 2 burgers in her bag, the man snatched them away with a smile. If you don't do as I say, I can't guarantee that one day my knife will land squarely on you instead of on the wall. After saying these words, the little maid was so frightened that she dared not speak any more. The man almost knew that the little maid had no courage, and when he finished speaking, he suddenly pulled out his knife and put it back. The little maid slowly recovered from her shock. She blinked her eyes and tried hard not to cry. I understand. When the man saw her nod, he left with satisfaction. Well, it's good that you know it. I'm waiting for your performance. Then the little maid ran all the way back to the Fu family. It wasn't until she returned to her studio that her nervous heart began to ease. So scary. The little maid couldn't control her tears any longer. She didn't know why she had to go through all these things, but she didn't have time to think about it at the moment. After all, her life was the most important thing. Thinking of this, she didn't rest for a moment. She quickly packed up her things and fled from here like a flash. Even the news of his resignation was only informed by Fu Yuhan through his assistant the next day. Hearing this, Fu Yuhan frowned slightly. Although he didn't understand why the maid suddenly resigned, he didn't think much about it, but he couldn't help but think of Xing Yinxi again. But then he felt relieved. After all, he had already told the servants of the Fu family to take good care of her. Even if the little maid resigned, no one would abuse Xing Yinxi. But the next second, Fu Yuhan found himself thinking about Xing Yinxi again, and couldn't help feeling a little annoyed. On the other side, in the morning, Xing Yinxi was just about to get up for breakfast, but unexpectedly found that breakfast as usual was not at the door. She called out twice tentatively. Anyone there? No one paid any attention to her. Xing Yinxi closed the door silently, thinking in confusion. I'm afraid the little maid took a day off today, or she didn't sleep well for some reason. After all, it rained yesterday, and she might have caught a cold because she got wet after going out. Thinking of this, Xing Yinxi didn't take the matter to heart, but waited for another 2 hours. Until she felt hungry again, she rubbed her stomach gently and opened the basement door again. Hello, why hasn't today's breakfast been delivered yet? I shouted but no one responded. Xing Yinxi felt a little helpless and called out several more times. At this moment, a lazy man finally came. Why are you yelling so loudly in the morning? Aren't you annoying? She was startled by the man's impatient voice, and then she spoke with some confusion. Why is it you? Where's the little maid? It was the little maid who usually brought her meals and took care of her daily life. Xing Yinxi had almost gotten used to her presence in the past few days, and she felt a little uncomfortable when she suddenly disappeared. But in response to her question, the man gave a nonchalant answer. How should I know? Maybe you are too difficult to please and you pissed them off. Seeing the sarcasm hidden in the man's smile, Xing Yinxi pursed her lips and had to continue speaking. What about breakfast today? Hearing that she wanted to eat, the man became even more impatient. Eat every day, are you a fat pig? Chapter 18 Starve her to death. Xing Yinxi looked at him in astonishment, not understanding why this man spoke to her in that tone. But the man still didn't give her a good look, instead he spoke impatiently. We didn't have time to eat breakfast, what are you going to eat? Xing Yinxi clenched her fists tightly. She wanted to get angry, but then she remembered that she was pregnant. For the safety of herself and her baby, she could only endure the humiliation temporarily. So, when can we eat? The man glanced at Xing Yinxi and snorted coldly. Just wait. We'll give you the leftovers after we finish eating. You can eat them naturally. After saying that, he slammed the door shut, ignoring Xing Yinxi's hungry look. Xing Yinshi was still immersed in the unexpected incident and hadn't recovered yet. She was a little confused and didn't understand what was going on. But when she thought of Fu Yuhan, Xing Yinshi began to understand a little. Because of what happened between them before, they were already in a big mess. Fu Yuhan was so angry that he ordered the servants to treat her like this and not to come back. Thinking of this, Xing Yinshi felt relieved. But then, a sneer appeared at the corner of her mouth. Fu Yuhan wanted to use this method to make her admit defeat and abort the child, but this was impossible. For the sake of her children, she can endure this difficulty. Thinking of this, Xing Yinshi took a deep breath and forced herself to be strong. Isn't he just not giving us food? Xing Yinshi doesn't he believe that they can do anything else besides not giving us food? After closing the basement door, the man returned to the living room. Assistant Li, why are you here? Seeing Fu Yuhan's assistant coming, the man's expression immediately changed. Li Zi nodded. Boss Fu asked me to come and see how the new person in the villa works. The man smiled even more flatteringly. Don't worry about this, we will definitely take good care of the lady wholeheartedly. With his words, Li Zi nodded with relief. Well, I'll be leaving first then. Only after Li Zi left did the smile on the man's face gradually fade. He then looked around, walked to a deserted place and made a phone call. Don't worry, sir, everything has been taken care of. The man on the other end of the phone was very satisfied. Remember to be harsh on her. Don't treat her as the real Madame Fu. Just keep her hanging and let her die slowly. The man nodded repeatedly. Don't worry, sir, we will do as you ask. After hanging up the phone, the servant's attitude returned to its usual coldness. Xing Yinshi was hungry the whole day, and it was not until the evening that a bowl of porridge and a bowl of water appeared at the door of the basement. She raised an eyebrow. Is this a return to the previous treatment pattern? Xing Yinshi found Fu Yuhan's coldness ridiculous and even more disgusting. I just wanted to keep their child, but he was so heartless. But the more Fu Yuhan wanted to suppress her, the more Xing Yinshi wanted to hold on. She wanted to grow tenaciously from the cracks. Without any hesitation, Xing Yinshi carefully drank the porridge and water given to her. Counting it up, Fu Yuhan hasn't been back for nearly a week. I don't know if I can hold on until he comes again. But Xing Yinshi doesn't have time to think too much at the moment. The only thing she is worried about now is her own health. As time went on, Xing Yinshi's belly gradually bulged and her pregnancy became more obvious. In order to protect her child, she lived very carefully every day, fearing that she would bump into or hurt the child. But because of the limited food, Xing Yinshi was hungry every day, often felt dizzy and sweaty. But for the sake of her children, she endured all of this. What's more, with the child, she can save Xinshin. This is her last chance. With this thought in mind, Xing Yinshi managed to get through it no matter how difficult it was. As the days went by, Xing Yinshi became weaker and weaker. Apart from lying in bed, her only exercise was to go to the basement door to get her daily food, eat it up in ravenous gulps, and then lie back down on the bed. After all, apart from lying down and sleeping, there is no action that consumes less physical energy than these two actions. But as time went on, Xing Yinshi felt that she could not hold on any longer. One evening, when the servants were bringing her food, Xing Yinshi tried to speak. Please, can you give me some more food? I'm almost dying. I'll give you as much money as you want. Faced with Xing Yinshi's pleading, the man was not moved at all. Instead, he curled the corners of his mouth and smiled mockingly. You deserve it. Why don't you take a piss and look in the mirror to see what you look like now? Will Mr. Fu fall in love with you again? Are you still the radiant Mrs. Fu from before? Xing Yinshi gritted her teeth and listened to the man's ridicule in silence. It was not that she didn't want to fight back, but the time was not right. Besides, she was so weak now. If she quarreled with this man, she would be the only one who would suffer in the end. I'll give you money, as much as you want. Xing Yinshi begged again. But the man still sneered, threw the daily food to the ground mercilessly, and said with a smile. Even if you want to give it to me, you are imprisoned in the basement now. Can you take out a penny? Wait until I get out. I'll definitely give it to you when I get out. Xing Yinshi grabbed his ankle and begged desperately. You think you can get out one day? What are you dreaming about? Mr. Fu is treating you like this. It's obvious that he wants to starve you to death here. Why don't you see the facts clearly? After the man finished speaking, he turned and walked away. Xing Yanqi listened to her words silently, clenching her palms tightly. The pain made her regain some clarity. She gritted her teeth and finished her food, then slowly lay back on the bed. Thinking back to what happened just now, what lingered in her mind was the servant's mocking face. Xing Yanqi couldn't hold back her tears. She was so cruel. She actually asked such a heartless person, wasted her 6 years, and even gave birth to their child. Even though their family had treated Fu Yuhan wrongly before, Xing Yanqi never expected Fu Yuhan to become like this. She always felt that their previous love was not fake, but now it seems that everything is just an illusion. Just thinking about this, Xing Yanqi gradually fainted on the bed. At some point, Xing Yanqi woke up again, a strong sense of hunger spread throughout her body, and her strong desire to win burst out. In a trance, she seemed to see Fu Yuhan again, but the Fu Yuhan she saw was the time when she just met him. He was gentle, considerate and caring to her, as if nothing had happened, and the two of them were still living happily together. Thinking back to the servant's words, Xing Yanqi couldn't help but feel suspicious. She always felt that Fu Yuhan was not that kind of person. Chapter 19. I want to visit your house. Even if he had an argument with her about the child, Fu Yuhan would not be so cruel as to starve her to death. However, Xing Yanqi had been locked in the basement for so long that she had long been cut off from communication with outsiders, and naturally became a person with no power, no influence, and no status. Now, she can even crush the servants of the Fu family to death at will. The next day, she discovered in despair that she used to be given a bowl of water and a bowl of porridge every day, but now there was only a small bowl of water left. She looked at the bowl of water in front of her, not knowing whether to cry or laugh. Now she is starving and has lost the strength to even cry. But looking at her bulging belly, Xing Yanqi took a deep breath. As long as she is still alive, she will never give up the baby in her belly. She will fight to the end. On the other side, Fu Yuhan was processing documents in the company and listening to Li Ziyi reporting about family matters. Mr. Fu, the servants at home said that Madam is in a stable condition recently. Apart from being depressed, there are no other problems. Hearing this, Fu Yuhan sneered. With that man's bastard in her belly, what else could she not be satisfied with? Li Ziyi lowered his head slightly and said nothing. But Fu Yuhan continued reviewing the documents for a while, then suddenly looked up and asked. Li Ziyi, I haven't been back to the villa for a few days. Li Ziyi was stunned, then thought for a while and said. About a week or so. Hearing this, Fu Yuhan pursed his lips. Just as he was about to go back and check, he received a call from Zhu Yangyang on his mobile phone. Yuhan, I just found a delicious restaurant. Are you free? Do you want to go with me? Faced with Zhu Yanyan's invitation, Fu Yuhan swallowed his words of refusal. Okay, are you coming over now? I'll pick you up. Li Ziyi watched Fu Yuhan hang up the phone silently, then handed him the car keys. Go drive. Good. Li Ziyi took the car keys and walked silently to the underground garage. He didn't ask too much about Fu Yuhan's private affairs, nor did he dare to ask too much. But somehow he always felt that the boss should spend more time with his wife. Although on the surface, Fu Yuhan and his wife did not have a good relationship, Li Ziyi could see that Fu Yuhan still cared about his wife, but he just didn't say it or admit it. Arriving at the underground garage, Li Ziyi slowly started the car and waited in the car for a while before Fu Yuhan got out. Go pick up Zhu Yangyang. Soon the car arrived downstairs of Zhu's house. Zhu Yangyang saw Fu Yuhan's car approaching from a distance and excitedly hurried to greet it. Yuhan, how come you came so quickly? Have you dealt with all the company's affairs? Don't worry, I know what's going on. Besides, how can the company's affairs be as important as you? If it weren't for Zhu Yangyang, Fu Yuhan's company would definitely not be what it is today. Zhu Yangyang smiled and took his hand. Then let's go. The car soon drove to the restaurant Zhu Yangyang wanted to go to, and Fu Yuhan followed behind her, allowing her to look at the restaurant and sigh. This restaurant has a nice atmosphere, very suitable for a date. Yuhan, let's go to this restaurant for our next date, shall we? After Zhu Yangyang finished speaking, she turned her head to look at him, but found that his eyes did not stay here, but drifted somewhere else, so she asked more puzzledly. Yuhan. Fu Yuhan finally reacted and nodded quickly, okay, whatever you say. Although Zhu Yangyang didn't say anything, she was a little puzzled and wondered what Fu Yuhan was thinking just now. Could it be that bitch? When she thought of this, Zhu Yangyang felt her spirit becoming excited, and the hatred for Xing Yunxi in her heart became more and more intense. Why can't this woman disappear from this world forever, and why does she still have to be entangled with Fu Yuhan? Thinking of this, Zhu Yangyang was extremely angry, but she didn't show it on her face. Yuhan, what are we going to do later? Are you free today? Don't do it like last time, where you accompanied me for a meal and then ran off to a meeting. Seeing Zhu Yanyan's aggrieved expression, Fu Yuhan quickly nodded in agreement. Don't worry, I have plenty of time today. I will definitely accompany you all day, okay? So, are you willing to do anything I want you to do with me? Zhu Yangyang winked at him. Fu Yuhan was startled. Yangyang, what do you want to do? Zhu Yanyan's smile grew wider, and then she pecked him on the cheek. I won't tell you. But her service attitude made Fu Yuhan frown. Yangyang, now is not the right time. You have no status, and I don't want to rush. Seeing that he looked strange, Zhu Yangyang sighed helplessly and then said to him. Okay, I don't really think that. I just want to keep you in suspense and see how you react. Why are you so excited? After hearing this, Fu Yuhan's expression eased a little. I'll do whatever you want, but you have to be careful about what you do. Then I won't do anything beyond the boundaries, so I can do whatever I want. Fu Yuhan nodded. Zhu Yangyang thought about it and spoke with pretended embarrassment. Then I want the stars in the sky, you pick them for me. Yangyang, don't embarrass me. I can give you everything I have. Seeing his helpless expression, Zhu Yangyang laughed triumphantly and then coughed twice. Okay, then how about I visit your villa today? It seems like you haven't officially welcomed me into your home yet. Although Zhu Yangyang had known him for some time, when she thought about it carefully, it seemed that she had never spent a good amount of time at Fu Yuhan's home. Before, Fu Yuhan felt that this was his and Xing Yunxi's home, so every time he brought Zhu Yangyang back, he felt a little awkward and naturally didn't want to bring her back. Although he knew that he was going to divorce Xing Yunxi, it always felt strange to bring Zhu Yangyang home before the divorce. He had always wanted to discuss these things after the divorce, but he didn't expect Zhu Yangyang to be impatient so soon. Seeing that he didn't say anything, Zhu Yangyang pouted in dissatisfaction. What? Are you going to reject me again? Faced with her dissatisfaction, Fu Yuhan smiled helplessly. Okay, I'll do as you say. We'll go back when you're tired of playing. Zhu Yanyan's smile brightened again. After dinner, Zhu Yangyang took Fu Yuhan to see a movie. When he was with her, Fu Yuhan always felt inexplicably calm. It was as if Zhu Yangyang was a piece of sandalwood. Being with her made Fu Yuhan feel the long-lost tranquility, and the burning fire in his heart disappeared unknowingly. Therefore, Fu Yuhan likes to stay with him very much. Ever since the incident at home, her mental state has been extremely unstable. If it weren't for Zhu Yangyang, he would have gone crazy long ago. After playing for a whole day, Zhu Yangyang was tired and started to throw a tantrum, so she asked Fu Yuhan to carry her. Chapter 20. Where is my sister? Fu Yuhan carried her to the car, and seeing that it was getting late, he leaned close to her ear and asked softly. It's getting late, let's just stop here, okay? Okay, Zhu Yangyang smiled and hugged his neck, smelling his scent, and said softly, shall we go to your house now? Fu Yuhan nodded, pulled her arm away, put it back on her legs, and smiled. I'll drive, baby. Hearing this, Zhu Yangyang nodded, but she felt a little dissatisfied in her heart. If she had known earlier, she would have asked Li Ziyi to come and wait earlier. If Zhu Yangyang hadn't been afraid that he would disturb their date, she wouldn't have found a reason to send him away. The car drove slowly and soon arrived at the Fu family. Looking at the house in front of her, Zhu Yanyan's heart was pounding and she felt a sense of anticipation. Get out of the car. While she was stunned, Fu Yuhan had already turned off the engine, then considerately opened the car door for her and took her hand to lead her into their house. Zhu Yangyang followed him in with a smile on her face. Zhu Yangyang hadn't seen Xing Yunxi for so many days. Although she didn't say it, she was actually very concerned about her. As soon as she entered the house, she couldn't wait to look around, trying to find Xing Yunxi. But the whole house was empty. Apart from a few hired servants, there was no one else. This made Zhu Yangyang nervous. Could it be that Xing Yunxi is not at home? But based on Fu Yuhan's character, Zhu Yangyang felt that he would not let Xing Yunxi leave his control. What's more, they had been delayed in divorce for 6 years because of Xing Yunxi's disappearance. How could Fu Yuhan let her go easily? What if Xing Yunxi disappears again? Thinking of this, Zhu Yangyang once again confirmed her idea of staying in the villa, but after turning around, she didn't see anyone, so she felt a little suspicious. Ms. Zhu, the meal is ready. Just as she was sitting on the sofa wondering, the servant next to her smiled at her with a flattering look on her face. Zhu Yangyang was very satisfied with his attitude. To make the servants treat her like this, they must have regarded themselves as the mistress of this house. As for the ex-wife who insisted on not getting a divorce, they wished to stay as far away from her as possible. A smile gradually appeared on Zhu Yanyan's lips. Good. Sitting at the table, Zhu Yangyang ate while thinking about how to mention Xing Yunxi to Fu Yuhan later. It was not until they finished their meal and it was getting late that Fu Yuhan spoke again. It's getting late. When are you planning on returning? Zhu Yangyang took the opportunity to throw a tantrum. Why are you so anxious to get me out? Does Brother Fu mean you don't welcome me? No way, Fu Yuhan explained hastily, I was just thinking about you. Why should I be in such a hurry to go back? This house is so big, and I haven't even had a good look around it yet. Can you show me around? After saying that, Zhu Yangyang seemed to think of something and smiled shyly. I will become the hostess of this house sooner or later anyway, so what's wrong with getting familiar with the environment in advance? Hearing this, Fu Yuhan smiled and nodded, okay. After agreeing, he took Zhu Yangyang for a walk around the villa. Of course, the basement is ignored. Zhu Yanyan's eyes widened as she looked at the house intently, wishing she could see every detail clearly. But after going around, she still didn't see Xing Yunxi. This doesn't make sense. If Xing Yunxi is not here, then where could she be? But Fu Yuhan was already trying to pull her back. After hesitating, Zhu Yangyang still tried to speak. Yuhan, why don't I see my sister? Is it because she hasn't come back yet? When he heard her mention Xing Yunxi, Fu Yuhan paused and a barely perceptible coldness flashed across his face. I was afraid that it would be unlucky for you to see her, so I didn't bring her to see you. Zhu Yangyang was naturally unwilling and tried to speak. It's okay. Knowing each other is fate. After all, you and your sister are a thing of the past. I'm not so narrow-minded that I can't accept this. But Zhu Yanyan's words did not change Fu Yuhan's mind. Instead, he said, Xing Yunxi is a vicious woman. I'm afraid you'll be in danger if you meet her, so it's better for you not to meet. After hearing Fu Yuhan's repeated refusal to let her see Xing Yunxi, Zhu Yangyang did not force it. If your purpose is too strong, it will easily arouse his suspicion. Zhu Yangyang still wants to pretend to be a gentle and innocent girl in front of Fu Yuhan for a while longer. Thinking of this, she raised her head and a gentle smile appeared on her face again. Okay then, Yuhan, go to the garage and wait for me. I'll be right back after I go to the bathroom. Fu Yuhan nodded, showing no intention of leaving. Okay, go ahead, I'll watch you. Zhu Yangyang turned around, walked up to the servant who had been so flattering to her just now, and said with a smile, Hello, where is the toilet? Can you guide me there? Of course, no problem, please follow me. The man smiled and then walked forward. Seeing that Zhu Yangyang really wanted to go to the bathroom, Fu Yuhan didn't think much about it and turned around and left. But when Zhu Yuanyuan walked to the corner and saw Fu Yuhan leaving, a hint of pride flashed across her heart. Just because Fu Yuhan doesn't let her see him doesn't mean she really won't see him. There are always more solutions than problems. Okay, I didn't want to go to the bathroom anyway. I asked you to come here because I wanted to ask you a question. Zhu Yangyang said as she looked at the door to see if Fu Yuhan had returned halfway, and secretly took out a wad of banknotes from her bag and stuffed it into the man's hand. Looking at the thick stack of money, the man's eyes lit up and the smile on his face became more flattering. Just tell me, Miss Zhu. I will tell you everything I know. Xing Yunxi, do you know where she is? The servant nodded quickly and spoke to her respectfully. Ms. Zhu, Xing Yunxi has been imprisoned by President Fu. Real. There was a hint of joy in Zhu Yanyan's voice. She didn't expect that Fu Yuhan hated her so much in this place that he actually locked her up. It is absolutely true, Miss Zhu. So how is she now? Don't worry, Xing Yunxi is being abused now. She only drinks porridge and water every day. She is almost starving to death. Zhu Yangyang immediately became excited. They are almost starving to death. Har har, it seems like it won't be long before Mrs. Fu's position becomes hers. Thinking of this, Zhu Yanyan's smile became even more proud. She was delighted and immediately took out some more money from her bag and stuffed it all into the man's hand. The man became even more excited and almost knelt down in front of Zhu Yangyang and said quickly, "Miss Zhu, please tell me what you want me to do. I will do whatever I can." Zhu Yangyang curled her lips and said lightly, "I want her to die, is that okay?" Chapter 21, No Water or Food. Hearing this, the man shuddered all over and then asked tentatively, "What do you mean? If you want him to do something like killing someone, he can't do it, and besides, he doesn't have enough money." "Don't worry, I won't let you do anything out of line. I'll just be a little harsher on her," Zhu Yangyang said nonchalantly with a smile on her face. The servant thought about it and realized that Xing Yinshi had been cut off from food and only drank a small bowl of water every day. If we were to be more harsh on her, wouldn't we not even give her water and leave her to fend for herself in the basement? Thinking of this, the servant couldn't help but tremble all over. Seeing this, Zhu Yangyang pursed her lips, took out some money from her bag, and gave it all to him. "Don't worry, you will definitely benefit after the matter is accomplished." When he saw the money, the man's eyes started to show anger again. After all, no one can resist money. He quickly took the money and said with a smile, "I understand, Miss Zhu, I will definitely do what you say." But looking at Zhu Yanyan's extremely gentle appearance in front of him, the man couldn't help but get goosebumps. He didn't expect that she looked so gentle, but actually hid an extremely cruel heart. But, never mind. Anyway, he just wants money, and sympathy is of no use to him. Seeing that he agreed, Zhu Yangyang smiled with relief. "Then I'll leave first. If Fu Yuhan asks about it later, you know what to say, right? Don't worry, I will keep it a secret and will never let him know the true situation of Xing Yinshi in the basement." "That's good." Zhu Yangyang nodded with satisfaction, and thinking that it was about time, she left the Fu family. When they got in the car, Fu Yuhan saw that she was late and couldn't help but frowned and asked, "Why are you so late?" Zhu Yangyang hid her inner panic and tried to cope with it. Is there? I think it's okay. Were you not feeling well, so you stayed in the bathroom for a long time?" "Oh yeah." Zhu Yangyang nodded quickly and continued, "Maybe I ate something bad today. Then go back and have a good rest, and remember to take your medicine on time." Only after sending the person back did Fu Yuhan rub his tired brows. There have been a lot of things happening in the company these days, and today he was delayed again because he was out playing with Zhu Yangyang. Now he had no choice but to go back to the company and work overtime. Seeing Fu Yuhan looking exhausted in the car, Li Zi couldn't help but say, "Mr. Fu, if you are tired, go back and have a rest. Health is more important. It's okay. The company's current success is inseparable from the hard work of Yang Yang and me. I can't abandon the company just for the sake of rest." What's more, ever since the incident in his family, Fu Yuhan's life has experienced ups and downs. With today's achievements, he cherishes them even more and naturally dares not give up easily. After an unknown amount of time, Xing Yinshi woke up from her coma again. She was a little dazed, and she didn't know how many times she had fainted in the past few days. Because of weakness, Xing Yinshi's cheeks were deeply sunken, and she looked very malnourished, and her hair was much thinner than usual. She dragged her belly, propped up her thin body, and walked towards the door step by step with great difficulty. But when she opened the door, she was surprised to find that where there should have been water, today there was only air in response to her, nothing else. A fear of death shrouded Xing Yinshi's heart. Her legs went weak, sweat broke out on the tip of her nose, and she staggered and almost fell on the stairs. Is she going to die? As she thought fearfully, she hurried back to her bed and looked at the dark ceiling. She suddenly felt that this was just like her life, which she could see the end at a glance, full of darkness and abyss, with no hope and no future. She wanted to cry, but found out in despair that she couldn't even produce tears due to lack of water. As she was crying, she suddenly laughed. Perhaps he never expected that one day he would live such a miserable life. But I have persisted until now for my baby, how can I give up so easily? What's more, even if he gave in, it probably wouldn't change the fact that he would be locked in the basement to fend for himself. She didn't dare to think about the reason behind this. She just wanted to know how she could live safely and give birth to this child. Before she knew it, she fainted again. She didn't know how long it had been before she woke up again. This went on for several days. Xing Yinshi felt that her body was becoming more and more overdrawn, as if she was getting closer and closer to death. Sometimes she would often have hallucinations and hear auditory hallucinations, imagining things that had not happened. It was as if all of this was a revolving lantern, playing in turn before her life was about to end, reminding her that there were warm and beautiful moments in her life. Then, she lost consciousness completely. The servants listened to the noise coming from the basement. Even if Xing Yunxi was lying on the bed every day, the bed would make some noise because the quality of the bed was too poor. But for some reason, they felt particularly quiet that day, as if there was no life in the basement and it was dead silent. Scary and a little confused, he opened the door to the basement, but was shocked to see Xing Yunxi lying on the bed. If for no other reason, after being tortured for so many days, Xing Yunxi had already changed beyond recognition. At this moment, she was thinner than a skeleton, and her entire skin seemed to be stuck to her bones, with no flesh visible. But the servant quickly adjusted his mindset, took 2 more steps forward, and seeing that her breathing was almost non-existent, he naturally assumed that she was dead. With Zhu Yinyan's order, the servant smiled with relief when he saw this scene. After all, as long as the person dies, his mission will be completed, and he might be able to get more salary then. Moreover, this task was not ordered by one person. When the time comes, he can tell the news to both parties and get double the money. The more he thought about it, the more excited he became. But right now, the most important thing is to tell Fu Yuhan what is happening. He was not worried about Fu Yuhan. After all, he has locked her up in the basement and tortured her for so many days, and there has been no news from her. Isn't this just letting her die? So he guessed that when he told Fu Yuhan, he would just say coldly, "I know," and let others deal with him. Thinking of this, he became excited and immediately contacted Li Ziyi. At this time, Li Ziyi was sitting at his assistant's workstation and working. When he heard the call coming from Fu's house, he picked up the phone with some doubts. The servant sobbed, pretending to be extremely scared. "Hello, is Mr. Fu here? I have something important to tell him." "Tell me what's going on." "President Fu is in a meeting right now." "I'll tell him later." Chapter 22, My Lady is Dead. Unconsciously, Li Ziyi's brows slightly frowned. Although he didn't hear what he said, he still felt a bad feeling in his heart. Sure enough, the next moment the servant told him about Xing Yunxi. What? Even though Li Ziyi was just a bystander of this incident, he couldn't help but stand up in surprise. The servant was startled and their voice gradually became weaker. "What's wrong, Mr. Li?" "I'll tell Mr. Fu later." Li Ziyi said this with mixed feelings and hung up the phone. He was very confused at the moment. Looking at the words "meeting in progress" in front of him, Li Ziyi hesitated for a moment, but decided not to disturb Fu Yuhan from the meeting. After all, he knew Fu Yuhan's temper. When he was working, anyone who disturbed him would make him impatient. Finally, after about half an hour, the meeting ended. Li Ziyi immediately rushed into the meeting room, startling everyone around him. Fu Yuhan even frowned and looked at him. "What's the emergency?" Li Ziyi was about to speak when he saw that no one around him had left, so he hurried to Fu Yuhan's side and winked at him. The people around immediately gave instructions and quickly packed up and left. Li Ziyi couldn't wait to say, "Mrs. Fu, she." He hesitated for a long time, but finally did not dare to tell the truth. And Fu Yuhan's brows furrowed even deeper. "What's wrong with her? Just finish your story." Before he knew it, Fu Yuhan had already tightened his grip on the handle, looking at him nervously. Li Ziyi summoned up the courage to say, "Madam, she's dead." Fu Yuhan was startled when he heard this. He stood up suddenly and stared at him in disbelief. "What did you say? Say it again." "Boss Fu, half an hour ago, there was a scary phone call from the Fu residence, saying that his wife had died." Li Ziyi said it bravely, not daring to look up at him. Fu Yuhan was so frightened that his whole body was shaking and he became extremely angry. "Why didn't you inform me immediately? What are you doing?" Faced with his roar, Li Ziyi shrank his neck and explained weakly. "Mr. Fu, you told us before that we can't disturb you when you are busy at work." Hearing this, Fu Yuhan immediately realized that in the early days of his company, every order was crucial, so he set this rule in order not to miss any opportunity. But now, Fu Yuhan felt that the taut string in his heart suddenly broke, as if something was out of his control, making him feel extremely panicked. He didn't say anything, but ran out suddenly. When he arrived at the underground garage, He stepped on the accelerator and the car sped away, running through 3 red lights before finally returning home. "Where's Xingyunxi?" Seeing Fu Yuhan suddenly barge in, the servants around were startled. Then, they realized, Madam Shen, she is still in the basement. Hearing this, Fu Yuhan kicked open the basement door and ran downstairs quickly. Seeing Xingyunxi's frightened look, Fu Yuhan's heart trembled violently. They didn't expect that after just a few days, Xingyunxi had become so thin. He stretched out his trembling hands and tested Xingyunxi's breath, only to find that Xingyunxi was not really dead, but had fainted because she was too weak. Seeing that she was not dead, Fu Yuhan felt relieved, but he was still on high alert. He gently picked up Xingyunxi and moved her to the room on the first floor. Seeing how much Fu Yuhan cherished Xingyunxi, the other servants stared with their eyes wide open. After all, Fu Yuhan had never shown up at home for so many days, and had ignored Xingyunxi. They had all seen it with their own eyes. Unexpectedly, someone died, and he became nervous. The servants beside him were also stunned. Didn't they say that Fu Yuhan didn't care about Xingyunxi at all? Then what was going on? It was not until he saw Xingyunxi lying back on the soft big bed that Fu Yuhan regained some of his senses. He rushed to the living room and looked at the servants angrily. "I asked you to take care of him, and that's how you did it. You took care of him to death, right?" Seeing Fu Yuhan's cannibalistic look, the servant trembled all over and begged for mercy. "Please spare us, Mr. Fu. We didn't mean to do that." He, Fu Yuhan slowly approached the servant, looked at him shaking like a sieve, and raised the corner of his mouth sarcastically. "Do you think you are stupid or I am stupid? You can starve someone to death by taking care of him, and you said you didn't mean it. Do you think I'm so easy to fool?" As he spoke, Fu Yuhan mercilessly grabbed his arm. With a snap, the servant let out a scream of extreme pain. "Arr!" The servant couldn't help but step back in pain, crying and begging for mercy. "Boss Fu, I really know I was wrong. Please let me go. If I let you go, then who will let her go?" Fu Yuhan walked towards him step by step, and each step seemed to step on his heart, making him feel that he was in great danger. He now had only one feeling, that he was about to die. But Fu Yuhan didn't bother to deal with him, but quickly called a doctor. "Li Ziyi, help me contact the best doctor in the city and ask him to come to their villa to save Xingyunxi. If Xingyunxi can't be saved, they can't expect to survive either." After saying that, Fu Yuhan threw away the phone and looked coldly at the servant in front of him. His voice was frighteningly cold, as if he had been soaked in an ice cave for 3 days and 3 nights. "Tell me, who supports you?" He was not stupid. After calming down, he could guess that he was a servant and had no grudge against Xingyunxi. Even if he disliked her, he would not abuse her to the point of fainting. Besides, doing so will do them absolutely no good. Unless someone else is giving them benefits and instructing them to do so. As expected, when the servant heard this, his eyes dodged, and then he tried to argue. You're overthinking it. No one ordered me to do this. It was my own carelessness and my lack of care for my wife that led to this situation." Hearing this, Fu Yuhan sneered and fixed his eyes on his other arm. "If you don't tell the truth, I suggest you cripple both of your arms and let you taste what it feels like to abuse others." "No." The servants stepped back in fear, their eyes filled with begging and panic. "No one forced me to do this, Mr. Fu, please forgive me. Let's assume that no one is forcing you to do this. If you let her pass out now, and if she doesn't wake up, do you want to exchange her life for hers? Even if she wakes up, shouldn't you chop off her arms for torturing her like this? Just to teach her a lesson." The servant trembled even more violently. He knew that with Fu Yuhan's means, it was entirely possible for him to do these things. Chapter 23 Buried with her. "No. Mr. Fu, I'll tell you." The servant spoke to Fu Yuhan with trembling lips. "Now the arrow is on the string and has to be shot. Fu Yuhan is forcing him like this, and he won't say anything anymore. He won't get the money yet, and his life will be lost here." But at this moment, there was a sudden knock on the door. Fu Yuhan suppressed his impatience and patiently opened the door. "I thought it was the doctor who arrived," but Fu Yuhan asked in surprise. "Why are you here?" The person who came was Lin Ji, Fu's father's secretary. As an elder of the Fu family, Fu Yuhan still respected him very much. Seeing him coming, Fu Yuhan hurriedly welcomed him in and asked someone to add more tea. "Mr. Fu, I'm here to report something to you." Lin Ji took out the surveillance video of that rainy night, which was the night when the little maid was threatened. Although the surveillance footage did not show any useful information, it could be seen that the little maid ran back to the villa in fear. And after that night, the maid resigned the next day. Fu Yuhan then remembered this matter and connected the two things together. His brows furrowed more and more tightly and he realized that something was wrong. I'm afraid, the one who hurt Miss Xing is related to this person. Lin Ji spoke slowly. That's all, Fu Yuhan nodded and said to Lin Zai with some gratitude. Thank you. If it weren't for you, I would probably still be kept in the dark. It's a pleasure to do it for you. Lin Ji nodded slightly, then glanced at the servant next to him calmly, but there was a deep meaning in his eyes. As for him, I'm afraid he is the link between him and that person. Fu Yuhan nodded, believing in his words without a doubt. Uncle Lin, thank you for this matter. Leave the rest to me. Okay, I won't bother you anymore. Seeing that his goal was achieved, Lin Ji left in a hurry. However, when he turned around, a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, which looked very creepy. It was not until Lin Ji's figure completely disappeared in the villa that the subordinates realized in despair that Lin Ji came to clear himself of suspicion and had no intention of helping him at all. In other words, he is just an abandoned pawn and has lost his value. As the trembling of his body became more and more obvious, Fu Yuhan did not show much expression, but just said lightly, "Is that arm going to be destroyed by you or me?" The servant quickly replied, "Boss Fu, please give me another chance, I really don't dare." How much money did that person give you to harm a life? Fu Yuhan ignored his pleas for mercy and instead pressed him with questions. The servant was so scared that he almost cried, kneeling on the ground and kowtowing frantically, "Boss Fu, I really know I was wrong." Fu Yuhan wasted no time and gave a wink to Li Ziyi who came behind him. "You handle it." After saying that, he turned and left the house. Looking at Fu Yuhan's departing back, the servant let out a final wail of despair, and then was covered by the mouth by the person next to Li Ziyi and dragged to the basement. Inside the house, Fu Yuhan gently sat down next to Xing Yinxi, looking at the hollow in her cheeks. A wave of guilt surged in his heart. He didn't understand. Even though Xing Yinxi had a blood feud with him, why was he still hopelessly concerned about everything about her? He couldn't think of an answer, so he could only attribute it all to guilt. After all, although Fu Yuhan hated Xing Yinxi, he didn't want to take her life, and this incident was not intentional on his part. So it is understandable that he feels guilty and cares about Xing Yinxi. Thinking of this, he sighed deeply. The next second, the doctors rushed in, filed into the room, and seriously checked Xing Yinxi's physical condition. Fu Yuhan was sweating nervously beside him. Is she okay? Several doctors took turns to perform physical examinations before wiping the cold sweat from their foreheads and speaking cautiously. Mr. Fu, Miss Xing was fortunately found in time. After our treatment, she is temporarily out of danger, but it will take some time for her to wake up. She will need careful treatment in the next few days. After hearing this, Fu Yuhan felt relieved and nodded. She must wake up, otherwise there is no need for you to stay in City A. Hearing this, the doctors all shuddered and nodded quickly. Fu Yuhan not only called a doctor, but also spent a lot of money to buy medical equipment in order to maintain Xing Yinxi's vital signs. After finishing all this, Fu Yuhan did not rest but asked Li Ziyi, "Have you dealt with everyone?" "It has been taken care of, Mr. Fu, you can rest assured." Hearing this, Fu Yuhan nodded and said, "Look for clues from Lin Ji and report to me whenever you find anything." Yes. At night, Xing Yinxi was still unconscious in bed, and 3 doctors stayed in the room to take turns watching her vital signs. Fu Yuhan pushed the door open and walked in, speaking to them calmly. "Go wait outside first. Come in when I call you." The 3 doctors nodded quickly and went out. Until the room returned to silence again, with only the sound of the medical equipment working. Accompanied by the soft moonlight, Fu Yuhan looked at Xing Yinxi gently. Even though she was now so thin that she looked unrecognizable, her beauty was still there. It just made her look paler and weaker, like a glass doll that would break at the slightest touch. Fu Yuhan sighed deeply. He didn't expect it to turn out like this. I don't know if Xing Yinxi hated him before she fell into coma. I guess he hates it so much. Anyone else would hate him. But it's normal. Fu Yuhan also hated Xing Yinxi. She had been unreasonable when signing the divorce agreement. Fu Yuhan hated and disliked her so much. But when Xing Yinxi became as thin as a piece of paper, Fu Yuhan couldn't help but tremble in his heart and couldn't bear to say any harsh words to her. After staying in the room for a while, Fu Yuhan came out again. Take good care of her and make sure she wakes up safely. Zhu Yangyang sent several messages to Fu Yuhan in a row, but all of them were marked as unread. I also made a phone call, but Fu Yuhan still didn't answer. She couldn't help but worry. This is not common sense. Ever since Fu Yuhan became more and more dependent on Zhu Yangyang, he would not ignore any of her messages. Even when he was busiest, he would find time to reply to her messages. Not like now, where I don't read a single word. She bit her lip and wanted to ask Li Ziyi, but then she thought she was being a little deliberate and gave up. But the next day, she soon heard that Fu Yuhan had called all the top doctors in the city into his villa with great fanfare. Zhu Yangyang is not stupid. Fu Yuhan has nothing better to do than to call so many doctors. It can't be that one of the servants in the house is sick, right? Chapter 24, Is she awake? The only possibility. Zhu Yanyan's expression gradually turned cold. She thought that once that bitch was locked up in the Fu family, everything would be fine and she could rest easy. I didn't expect that this bitch actually had this trick up her sleeve. Watching the video secretly filmed by the servant, showing Fu Yuhan guarding Xing Yinxi's bedside attentively, she unconsciously clenched her fingers and became even angrier. This bitch! How dare she steal her man? She must be tired of living. As she thought about it, a hint of ferocity flashed across her eyes, and then she packed up her things and left home. On the other side, in Fu's house, Fu Yuhan looked at Xing Yinxi lying on the hospital bed and saw that she still showed no signs of waking up, and he couldn't help but get furious. I asked you to come here. Is this how you are going to treat her? If she doesn't wake up, you won't survive. Hearing Fu Yuhan's roar, everyone shrank their necks and dared not speak. After all, if they anger this gentleman, there will be no limit to their fate. What are you standing there for? She won't wake up, I want you to be buried with her. Upon hearing this, the doctors became diligent and eager to let Fu Yuhan see that they really put all their energy into treating Xing Yinxi. Fu Yuhan rubbed his brows tiredly. He had been watching over Xing Yinxi in the ward these days, which resulted in him not being able to resolve any of the company's issues. Now a lot of things have piled up. Li Ziyi next to him seized the opportunity and walked over. Mr. Fu, if you don't take care of the company's affairs, the senior management may not be able to cope with it. Fu Yuhan also knew this truth, and nodded helplessly. He then looked deeply at Xing Yinxi lying on the hospital bed before speaking. Then let's go to the company first. After Fu Yuhan left, the group of doctors dared to wipe the cold sweat from their foreheads, feeling as if they had been saved. It's too horrible, if Fu Yuhan didn't offer so much, they would never take the job. However, as soon as Fu Yuhan left, a figure appeared at the door of Fu's house. Zhu Yangyang has checked and Fu Yuhan is not at home now. Thinking of this, Zhu Yangyang raised her hand and pressed the doorbell. The servant opened the door and asked in confusion. Miss, who are you? I'm Miss Zhu. I just came to Fu's house a few days ago. Don't you remember? Zhu Yangyang was extremely annoyed that the servants didn't remember her identity, but in order not to damage her impression in their minds, she curled her lips and pretended to be friendly. The servant thought carefully for a long time before he remembered that the president seemed to have brought a young lady named Zhu home for dinner a few days ago. Thinking of this, she nodded quickly and led the person in respectfully. Please come in. After entering the house, Zhu Yangyang looked around and found that Fu Yuhan was indeed not at home, so she became even more unscrupulous. Which room is Xing Yinxi in? Hearing that she went straight to Xing Yinxi as soon as she arrived, the servant seemed a little embarrassed. After all, Fu Yuhan had been angry at home because of Xing Yinxi these days, causing panic among everyone. When Xing Yinxi was mentioned, everyone's heart trembled, fearing that Fu Yuhan would vent his anger on themselves. But facing Zhu Yanyan's unquestionable gaze, the servant still spoke. Ms. Zhu, the vice president, is very concerned about your wife, and she is in a coma now. The doctor is treating her in the house. I'm afraid it won't be a good idea for you to go there now. She felt indignant when she heard the servants calling Xing Yinxi madam all the time and referring to herself as the distant Miss Zhu. Why, even though Xing Yinxi is Mrs. Fu now, it doesn't mean she will always be yours in the future. Can't you see that Yuhan likes me more? Xing Yinxi is just a burden to him. If they could get divorced, they would have done so long ago. Perhaps the servant didn't expect Zhu Yangyang to suddenly get angry. He was stunned for a moment and didn't know how to respond. Zhu Yangyang also immediately realized her gaffe, and after fixing her hair she began to speak again. Don't worry, you just need to tell me which room she is in. I won't do anything to harm her, and I won't embarrass you. What's more, even if you don't tell me, I will check every room and eventually find out where she is. Hearing this, the servant stopped struggling and simply nodded. Ms. Zhu, it's in the innermost compartment on the second floor. After hearing this, Zhu Yangyang followed her gaze and then walked into the ward with her head held high. The last room was not far away. When Zhu Yangyang approached the room, she saw many doctors busying around. Seeing Zhu Yangyang coming, the doctor was a little puzzled, but still nodded politely. Hello, may I ask who you are? Oh, I'm Yuhan's friend. Yuhan is busy with company matters, so he asked me to come and see him. The doctor said excitedly, Madam is awake. Zhu Yangyang froze, as if she didn't expect Xing Yinshi to be so lucky and wake up so quickly. She even thought that there was a possibility that Xing Yinshi would die directly. Hiding her disappointment, Zhu Yangyang said to the doctor with a smile. Since she's awake, you should take a rest first. You've been so busy these past few days that you're exhausted. The group of doctors were indeed very tired. When they heard this, they did not doubt it but nodded repeatedly. Okay, then we'll go to the living room to rest first. If anything happens, please tell us in time. They just checked Xing Yinshi's physical condition and found that her vital signs were relatively stable after she woke up, and there was no problem for the time being. Zhu Yangyang nodded and watched them leave before she chuckled and went into the room and closed the door. In the ward, Xing Yinshi woke up for a short while, but when she realized that the child was still there, she breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the child is fine. Xing Yinshi touched her belly with some relief, and a smile appeared on her face. As long as the child is fine, all her efforts these days are worth it. But looking at the dazzling light outside the window, Xing Yinshi felt a little dazed. She had been staying in the basement for so long and she hadn't seen the sunlight for a long time. Just let her out. Well, no matter how much Fu Yuhan hated her, he didn't want anyone to die. She weakly raised her arms to block the glaring light in front of her eyes, and only then did she feel a little better. At this moment, a female voice suddenly came from beside me. Woke up. Xing Yinshi was startled. After she realized what was happening, she saw that the woman in front of her was Zhu Yangyang. Her eyes became cold again and she turned her head away, not wanting to pay any attention to her. But Zhu Yangyang did not give up. Instead, she walked half a circle and stood in front of Xing Yinshi. Zhu Yangyang blocked the sun, and Xing Yinshi slowly lowered her arms and looked at her in a daze. What's the matter with you coming to see me? Her tone was cold, and it was obvious that she didn't want to talk to her. Chapter 25 Thank me. Why, is this how you treat your savior? However, Zhu Yangyang curled her lips, then folded her arms across her chest and looked at her with disdain. Xing Yinshi frowned. What do you mean? Literally. After Zhu Yangyang finished speaking, she sat down on a chair beside her, crossed her legs, and looked at her smugly. Xing Yinshi frowned even tighter. I don't know what you are talking about. Oh, Zhu Yangyang sneered, her eyes filled with disdain. Don't you recognize the facts yet? If it weren't for my plea, Fu Yuhan would have starved you to death. I don't believe it. Xing Yinshi didn't know what she was thinking and denied it outright. Seeing that she refused so firmly, Zhu Yangyang also smiled. You are already like this, what else is there to disbelieve? Zhu Yangyang examined her skinny body, then stared at her sunken cheeks and smiled disdainfully. He has locked you up and cut off your water and food. Why don't you believe it? Do you have to die before you believe it? You? Xing Yinshi looked at him and bit her lip unwillingly. She couldn't believe what Zhu Yangyang said. After all, she and Fu Yuhan knew each other. She couldn't believe that Fu Yuhan actually wanted to starve her to death. So this is how you treat me as your lifesaver? You didn't even say thank you. Zhu Yangyang raised her eyebrows and spoke, as if she had really saved Xing Yinshi's life. Xing Yinshi couldn't help but doubt. Is what Zhu Yangyang said true? But there was no time to think about it. Zhu Yangyang smiled and said, on this point, I am at least more thoughtful than you think. I am worried that Yuhan will be held responsible for the murder, so I plead for you. Otherwise, don't expect me to speak for you. Xing Yinshi listened to Zhu Yangyang's words without saying a word. She clutched the bed sheet tightly, with mixed feelings in her heart. However, Zhu Yanyan's actual purpose was not to hear Xing Yinche's apology. She just wanted to take this opportunity to humiliate her. Seeing the difficulty on her face, Zhu Yangyang raised the corners of her mouth proudly, slowly stood up, walked to the bed, and looked down at her condescendingly. "Why aren't you talking? Are you mute?" Xing Yinche took a deep breath and said quietly, "I won't believe your lies. Don't try to sow discord between him and me." But when Zhu Yangyang heard this, she laughed wildly. She was so excited that her body was a little unstable. Har 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 har. "Xing Yinche, are you serious? Apart from being enemies, what else do you think of me as a sower? You think too highly of yourself." Xing Yinche gritted her teeth and said, "Don't pretend. Haven't you done enough to make Fu Yuhan hate me?" Zhu Yangyang put away the smile on her face and glanced at her coldly. "I just want him to hate you, what's wrong with that? How dare a bitch like you stay by his side? Don't forget that if it weren't for your family, Fu Yuhan wouldn't be like this at all." These words really hit the nail on the head for Xing Yinche. Her heart suddenly began to tremble violently, and her fingers were shaking. "You were also involved in what happened back then." But unfortunately, he didn't know. Zhu Yangyang raised a smug smile on her face and then said with a gloating look, "Besides, he still regards me as his savior. Now he relies on me so much that he can't survive without me." Hearing her tone, Xing Yinche finally couldn't bear it anymore. She dragged her weak body up from the bed, put on her slippers, and looked at her angrily. "What do you want? You've already made him hate me. Isn't that enough? What do you want? I want you to die. Go to hell, and disappear from this world right now." Zhu Yanyan's eyes suddenly became crazy. She stared at her, as if she wanted to tear her apart and devour her with her eyes. Xing Yinche was startled by her look and didn't react for a moment. He struggled to take a few steps back and reached the door, thinking in a somewhat erratic manner. This woman, is her mental state really normal? She vaguely remembered that Zhu Yangyang appeared beside Fu Yuhan as a psychologist. Logically speaking, there should be no mental problems with this line of work. But the facts before her didn't allow her to think so much. Zhu Yangyang was looking at her closely, and Xing Yinche was afraid for her life at that look. It all ended here. Although she and Zhu Yangyang did not get along and she indeed disliked her, she knew that her own life was more important. Thinking of this, Xing Yinche spoke carefully. "You, calm down. How do you expect me to calm down? You've taken away his companionship for so many years. I can't hate you enough. Stop acting like a victim." Xing Yinche pushed the door handle with some fear and continued to back away. The door of the room connected to the stairs leading from the second floor to the first floor. Xing Yinche felt the escalator at the back and realized something was wrong. She managed to brake, but she was sweating all over. It was a close call. If she hadn't braked, she would have rolled down the stairs. When Zhu Yangyang saw her like this, she sneered. "Humph, you're lucky, bitch. If you had fallen down by yourself, I wouldn't have to do anything." Xing Yinche glanced at her and quickly moved away from the stairs. "Don't even think about it. I want to give birth to this child safely." Zhu Yangyang narrowed her eyes, stared at her belly, and snorted coldly. "You really want to have a child with Yuhan? How shameless." Xing Yinche calmed herself down and said in a bad tone. "No matter what, I am the only legitimate wife of the Fu family. What's wrong with me being pregnant with my husband's child? As for you, you are just the part of our marriage that cannot be seen in public. What qualifications do you have to point fingers in front of me?" Xing Yinche's words touched Zhu Yanyan's sore spot. She stared at Xing Yinche with hatred in her voice. "Just wait, Xing Yinche, I won't let you have it easy. Fu Yuhan likes me now, so what if you are the wife of the Fu family? If you can't get his heart and soul, what's the difference between you and the walking dead? Don't forget, if it weren't for him, you wouldn't have been locked up in the basement for more than half a month. Heh, I didn't expect you to pay so much attention to me. You knew when I went into the basement, and you came over to taunt me after I woke up. Zhu Yangyang, you are really scheming. This is all thanks to you. If you hadn't stopped me from being with him, I wouldn't have cared so much about you." But just as she finished her words, Zhu Yangyang heard the servant's voice calling her from downstairs. "Mr. Fu, you're back. Chapter 26. You are a vicious woman." Alarm bells rang in her heart. She didn't expect Fu Yuhan to come back so soon. But this is just right. A plan quietly formed in her mind, and almost instantly, she curled her lips. Xing Yinxi wanted to say something else, but found that Zhu Yangyang simply ignored her and turned around to leave. Don't go. Xing Yinxi was unhappy. Zhu Yangyang felt better after scolding her, but what about her? She hasn't yet settled the score with Zhu Yangyang for delaying her waking up and recovering. But the next second, Zhu Yangyang pretended to scream, then slipped and rolled down the stairs. R. Xing Yinxi's pupils shrank, and she looked at Zhu Yangyang tumbling down the stairs in disbelief. But when her eyes fell on Fu Yuhan, Xing Yinxi understood everything in an instant. All of this was planned by Zhu Yangyang, who deliberately framed her. Xing Yinxi was shaking with anger. It was not a pleasant feeling to be wrongly accused, especially so repeatedly. Zhu Yangyang used a lot of strength when she fell. Fortunately, the slope of the stairs was not very steep, so she was not seriously injured, but she did hurt her leg. But this did not stop her from pretending to be in great pain. She looked at Fu Yuhan, who came hurriedly and cried bitterly. Yuhan, save me, I'm in pain, my whole body is in pain. Xing Yinxi also hurried to the first floor and looked at the scene in front of her in disbelief. She had not yet reacted. Fu Yuhan stared at her intently. Xing Yinxi, are you satisfied? I didn't. Xing Yinxi shook her head frantically, then held Fu Yuhan's hand and clenched it tightly in her palm, trying to make him believe her. Believe me. Yuhan, I really didn't push her down. Do you believe in my character? Facing Xing Yinxi's helpless eyes, Fu Yuhan's gaze relaxed for a moment. But at this moment, Zhu Yanyan's resonant voice came from under his feet again. It hurts. Yuhan, please save me, I feel like I'm about to die. Zhu Yanyan's tears welled up in her eyes, and it looked so unreal. But she did not lie. Her fall was not fake and she was really in great pain. Xing Yinxi's face was pale. She was already weak and had been so frightened just now that she was shaking uncontrollably. But Fu Yuhan just glanced at her coldly, then carefully picked up Zhu Yangyang from the ground. Zhu Yangyang was still adding fuel to the fire, and Fu Yuhan became even angrier after hearing this. Yuhan, don't blame your sister. She must have just pushed me down the stairs accidentally, don't make things difficult for her, she's pregnant. Fu Yuhan stared at Xing Yinxi's face and spoke coldly. Xing Yinxi, how can you be so cruel? God is watching you. Everything you do will eventually backfire on the child in your belly. Xing Yinxi looked straight into his eyes, unable to see the slightest bit of other emotions, only endless hatred. Xing Yinxi suddenly smiled, but 2 lines of tears flowed down her cheeks. This child is yours. Do you think I will believe it? A sneer flashed across Fu Yuhan's face, and then without even looking at her, he quickly left with Zhu Yangyang in his arms. Although Zhu Yangyang was in great pain, she had almost recovered at this moment. She opened her eyes slightly, looked at Xing Yinxi, who was crying not far away, and raised the corners of her mouth with pride. Idiot, you still want to fight me? Xing Yinxi was still in shock and pain when she saw Li Ziyi walk up to her and say lightly. Madam, Ms. Fu wants you to come with her. Good. Xing Yinxi agreed with some recklessness. Things have developed to this point, could they get any worse? After getting in the car, Xing Yinxi did not follow them, but got in another car and followed behind. The car was bumpy all the way, and Xing Yinxi had just woken up, her body was already very weak, and after going through this argument, her lips were frighteningly pale, and she felt dizzy. Suddenly, Li Ziyi handed her a bottle of water. Please drink some water. He saw all these things. But he is just a worker after all, so even if he sees something, it is difficult for him to point it out. Thanks. Xing Yinxi felt a lump in her throat. Unexpectedly, the only person who was nice to her here was a stranger, and they had never even spoken to each other. When the car arrived at the hospital, Xing Yinxi followed in a daze and saw Fu Yuhan carrying Zhu Yangyang into the ward. She adjusted her breathing and found a chair nearby to sit down. I don't know how long I waited, but the door of the ward was opened again, and the doctor and 2 young nurses pushed the door open and walked out, then disappeared. Xing Yinxi couldn't help but look into the ward. Zhu Yangyang leaned weakly in Fu Yuhan's arms, with gauze wrapped around her legs, looking extremely frail. While Fu Yuhan was coaxing Zhu Yangyang, his eyes were fixed on Xing Yinxi. Before Xing Yinxi could react, Li Ziyi said with some embarrassment, Madam, Mr. Fu asked you to come in. When Xing Yinxi heard this name, she suddenly felt ridiculous. As Mrs. Fu, she could only watch her husband hugging another woman. She said nothing, but slowly got up and walked into the ward. Yang Yang hurt her joints, are you satisfied? Fu Yuhan's eyes were filled with coldness, and just one glance at him was like falling into an icy cave. Xing Yinshi pursed her lips, not knowing what to say. But she clearly saw Zhu Yangyang giving her a provocative smile. Xing Yinshi clenched her fists and tried to argue again. I really haven't done anything like this. Okay, Yuhan, don't embarrass my sister. I don't think she did it on purpose. She was probably just blinded by anger. It would be bad if the relationship between you two was affected because of me. Zhu Yangyang really stepped on Xing Yinshi's bottom line and jumped back and forth. Every word she said could ignite Xing Yinshi's anger. But the angrier she got, the smugger the smile on Zhu Yanyan's face became. However, one thing Zhu Yangyang said was not correct. There is no feeling between the two of them anymore, so there is no question of whether they can get hurt or not. Yang Yang, there's no need for you to speak for her anymore. She has hurt you to this extent. It's not too much for her to kneel down and apologize to you. Xing Yinshi looked at Fu Yuhan in disbelief. Zhu Yangyang almost laughed out loud, and could only turn her smile into a cough to cover it up. Ahem, Yuhan, my sister is still pregnant. It would be bad if she gets hurt by kneeling down. Oh, that was all her own fault. It's her karma. Fu Yuhan said sarcastically without mercy. This was the first time that Xing Yinshi felt so ridiculous. It was as if Xing Yinshi had become the agent that warmed their relationship. But it is obvious that Xing Yinshi is Fu Yuhan's wife. Chapter 27 She Stays. Fu Yuhan, I just want to ask you one question. Have you ever believed a single word I said? Fu Yuhan was stunned for just a moment, then he sneered and spoke with disdain. Do you think that based on what you did before, I can believe a word of it? Facing his answer, Xing Yinshi raised the corners of her mouth in self-mockery. Yes, what ability do I have to make him believe a single word? Obviously the two of them had come to this point, and Xing Yinshi had nothing to explain. Looking at her appearance, Fu Yuhan's face gradually turned cold. Somehow, he felt a blockage in his heart, making him breathless. Zhu Yangyang was still waiting for Xing Yinshi to kneel down and apologize to her when she heard a cold sentence from Fu Yuhan beside her. Get away from me, don't let me see you again. Hearing Xing Yinshi telling her to get out, Xing Yinshi bit her lip, turned around in humiliation and left the hospital. Zhu Yangyang was a little unhappy, but still pretended to be puzzled and asked, Yuhan, why did you let her go so suddenly? I get annoyed by her face. After Fu Yuhan finished speaking, he looked at Zhu Yangyang again, with a hint of inquiry on his face. Why, you don't want her to leave? A look of hesitation flashed across Zhu Yanyan's face, and then she shook her head. No, I just felt that my sister left a little too suddenly, and I didn't react. I see. Fu Yuhan nodded, a hint of mockery flashed across his eyes. I thought you really wanted to see her kneel down to you. Zhu Yanyan's smile froze, and then she punched him in the chest in a coquettish manner. Yuhan, don't think so badly of me. After staying in the hospital for another afternoon, Fu Yuhan finally carried Zhu Yangyang back to their Fu residence. Seeing her coming, Xing Yinshi froze and looked at Fu Yuhan in disbelief. She didn't expect that, since she was still the wife of the Fu family, he would be so open and aboveboard as to bring someone into their house. What does this take her for? But Xing Yinshi thought about these words in her mind for a long time, but facing Fu Yuhan's eyes, she still uttered a few words stiffly, with a smile on her face that she didn't even notice. Why, is she here too? Fu Yuhan just glanced at her indifferently and then looked away. Yang Yang injured her joints and can't move around, so she has to stay with me temporarily. Do you have any objections? Xing Yinshi shook her head and smiled bitterly. At this time, she said she had some opinions. Is that okay? Zhu Yangyang looked at Xing Yinshi provocatively, then let Fu Yuhan carry her to the sofa in the living room, carefully protecting her, and then gave instructions to the servant beside her. Yang Yang's leg is seriously injured. She needs to rest and has difficulty moving. If she needs anything in the future, you must help her to the best of your ability. Yes, Mr. Fu. The servants nodded repeatedly. Then, Fu Yuhan's gaze moved to Xing Yinshi's face. The same to you. Xing Yinshi raised her head in some surprise. He meant, to let him take care of Zhu Yangyang. Xing Yinshi could hardly believe that Fu Yuhan could say such a thing. But after he finished speaking, he did not give Xing Yinshi a chance to refuse. Without even looking at her, he let Li Zi send him to the company to work. Sheng Yinshi clenched her fists tightly. Although Fu Yuhan had been very harsh towards her before, for the sake of herself and her child, she remained silent most of the time. But this time, it really went a bit too far. Sheng Yinshi is not a saint, nor is she a soft persimmon that can be easily bullied. She couldn't tolerate being humiliated like this. When Zhu Yangyang saw Fu Yuhan leave, she became even more unscrupulous. What are you standing there for? Come over here and peel some fruit for me. Sheng Yinshi looked up and found that Zhu Yangyang was looking in her direction. She couldn't help but clench her fists but didn't move. Why, you turned a deaf ear to what Fu Yuhan said, right? He, Sheng Yinshi curled her lips and said lightly, he did say that, but I didn't agree. There was nothing wrong with what he said. After all, Fu Yuhan didn't even look at Sheng Yinshi's response, but left directly. But Zhu Yanyan's expression became even uglier. What do you mean? Be careful or I'll tell Yuhan about it. It's useless even if you complain to the King of Heaven, Zhu Yangyang, don't forget what situation I'm in now. If you make me angry, I don't mind if we both lose. Sheng Yinshi stared straight into her eyes and said very firmly. Zhu Yangyang was stunned. She didn't expect Sheng Yinshi to speak so firmly all of a sudden. These days, Zhu Yangyang rarely saw Sheng Yinshi scolding her and Fu Yuhan. She was really caught off guard by the suddenness of this incident. But she soon thought of something, laughed twice and said, Har har, don't try to scare me. I'm not that easy to fool. You've been pregnant for a month now, right? What if something unexpected happens and the baby is aborted? Or if there's one body and two lives, wouldn't that mean all our efforts would be in vain? When Sheng Yinshi heard that Zhu Yangyang was threatening her with the matter of the child, her eyes dimmed. You dare? Whether I dare not to do it or not, and how to do it specifically depends on Fu Yuhan. Zhu Yangyang smiled faintly, but her eyes were filled with uncontrollable excitement. Sheng Yinshi, you should prepare to serve me well during this period of time, otherwise I can't guarantee what Yuhan will do after listening to me. Sheng Yinshi clenched her fists. To be honest, what Zhu Yangyang said really touched her heart, and she is now very concerned about this. But she also has eyes and a heart. What she felt was not fake. After she fell into danger, it was Fu Yuhan who went to great lengths to invite a doctor to treat her and take personal care of her. She didn't believe that she really had no feelings for him. It was just that because of what happened before, he still harbored hatred towards her, so he didn't treat her well. However, this does not mean that he only abuses himself. What's more, she didn't agree to hand Fu Yuhan over to such a vicious woman. Thinking of this, she spoke slowly. Well, then you try it. After saying that, Sheng Yinshi turned around and went upstairs to her room to rest. Now that she has just recovered from a serious illness and is already very weak, she should use this time to restore her physical condition so that she can give her baby better health. You. Looking at her departing back, Zhu Yangyang was shaking with anger, her fingers clenched into fists, staring at the direction she left. This ungrateful bitch really gave her face. How dare you do this to me? Zhu Yangyang withdrew her gaze angrily, turned around and saw that the fruit on the table was motionless, then she started cursing at the maid next to her. Are you blind? Can't you see I need someone to peel the fruit? Why are you standing here like a log? The maid nodded quickly and immediately began to peel grapes for her.